Nobody saw the baby falling, except the dog they almost gave up on. They said Axel was done, retired, worn out, but something in his eyes said otherwise. They didn't expect much when they brought him home. Just hoped he might keep the house from feeling too empty. That maybe, just maybe, he'd sleep better under a roof than in a kennel. What they didn't expect was for him to save a life. Noah was small, fragile. Neurologists called it a rare condition. His parents called it terrifying. He couldn't move much, couldn't cry loud. That's what made what happened one night so dangerous and what made Axel's reaction so extraordinary. Because when the baby monitor crackled and no one heard, Axel did. This is the story of what happened next, and why that old dog became a hero once again. The morning sun filtered softly through the white lace curtains of the Miller house on Birchwood Street, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with its usual comforting rhythm. Distant lawnmowers, birds perched on utility lines, the occasional jogger waving to neighbors. It was the kind of place where life moved just slow enough to be savored a perfect canvas for new beginnings. Inside, Ethan stood by the kitchen window, cradling a steaming cup of coffee. His dark hair was slightly tousled from sleep, and he wore a gray cotton tee, loose at the shoulders from years of wear. Behind his square-rimmed glasses, his eyes followed a squirrel darting along the fence, not really seeing it, lost in thought. Ethan was a software developer who worked from home, a man of precision, logic, and quiet rituals. Order comforted him. He liked code because it was predictable, unlike life. At the stove, Lena hummed softly to herself as she flipped pancakes. Her honey blonde hair was tied in a messy bun, and her scrubs were neatly folded on a chair, ready for her afternoon shift. She moved with the fluid ease of someone used to tending others before herself. As a registered nurse at Denver General, she had seen more chaos and heartbreak in a week than most people did in a year. And yet, she remained soft, gentle in how she spoke, how she listened, how she loved. Their newlywed life wasn't glamorous, but it was tender. They had only been married 9 months, yet the rhythm of their mornings felt older, like a song they'd always known the words to. Their house was Modesta, one-story craftsman with creaky floors and a backyard they hadn't quite figured out yet, but it was theirs. The walls were slowly filling with framed memories, houseplants that mostly survived, and the quiet warmth of shared dreams. Ethan took a sip of his coffee and looked over at Lena. "I was thinking," he said, his voice still raspy with sleep, "we should take a drive up to Pikes Peak this weekend. Just the two of us." Lena smiled over her shoulder, flipping a pancake. "That sounds amazing. I could use some mountain air and a break from charting vitals." He chuckled. "We'll bring the camera. Maybe we'll finally get that Christmas card photo your mom's been asking for." A quiet moment passed between them. Then, almost as an afterthought, Lena said, "You know, sometimes I wonder what it'd be like with a little one around. A baby." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised but not unsettled. "You thinking of starting a family already?" She shrugged, cheeks flushed. "Not now. Just someday, when the time is right." He looked at her for a long second, then smiled gently. "Yeah? Someday." Neither of them knew that someday was knocking at their door far sooner than either imagined. That afternoon, Lena headed off for her shift at the hospital, blowing Ethan a kiss as she disappeared down the driveway. Ethan settled into his workspace, 2 monitors, a cluttered desk, soft jazz in the background. Hours passed in lines of code, broken only by sips of coffee and the occasional stretch. As the sun dipped low behind the row of houses, casting long shadows over the street, Ethan paused to rub his eyes. That was when it happened. 3 sharp knocks at the front door. Then again, urgent, frantic. He blinked, unsure if he'd imagined it. Another knock, louder this time. He set down his mug and walked toward the door, puzzled. Through the frosted glass, he could make out a figure small, hunched, holding something. His stomach tightened. He opened the door and everything changed. The light was beginning to change. It was that hour when the sun melts low behind the rooftops, stretching the shadows long across the lawn like fingers reaching for something lost. Birchwood Street was beginning to quiet. Children called in for dinner, lawnmowers silenced, windows glowing warm with the soft flicker of evening routines. Inside the Miller home, Ethan had just submitted his final line of code for the day. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his temples, and glanced toward the empty kitchen. Lena was still at the hospital. She'd texted earlier that her shift might run long. He missed her in these quiet hours, especially in the fall. The house always felt one room too big when she was gone. He stood and stretched, about to warm up leftovers, when it came. A knock. Sharp, quick, then again louder. Ethan froze, eyes darting to the door. 3 more knocks followed, fast and insistent. Not the kind of knock meant for casual visits. He moved slowly at first, cautious. Who could be knocking like that at this hour? As he reached for the door handle, something inside him stirred a flicker of unease, the kind that settles in the stomach before the mind catches up. He opened the door, and time stopped. Standing there, backlit by the dimming gold of the sun, was a woman young, disheveled, trembling in place. Her hair was unkempt, strands falling across her face. Her jeans were muddy at the knees. Her coat hung off one shoulder, and in her arms was a baby, bundled tightly in a soft, fading blue blanket. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, almost vacant, but behind them shimmered something raw and shaking. Panic, desperation, a kind of hollow determination that said, this was her last move. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Can I help you? The woman didn't respond right away. Her arms tightened around the infant, her body swaying slightly. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she said, please, I can't do this anymore. He's yours now. Ethan blinked. What? He stammered, utterly lost. She stepped forward, lifting the baby into his arms with care but urgency. The baby barely stirred, sleeping soundly, a tiny face peeking from beneath the blanket. Ethan caught a faint whiff of milk, sweat, and something else familiar, maybe powder or hospital antiseptic. I can't, she repeated, her voice breaking this time. But you can. I know you can. Before he could form another word, she pulled a crumpled envelope from her coat pocket and shoved it into his free hand. Then, without waiting, without explanation, she turned. Wait, Ethan called, heart now pounding. She didn't turn back. She took the front steps in a half-run, feet stumbling, coat fluttering behind her like a torn flag in retreat. Ethan watched, stunned, as she turned the corner at the end of the block and disappeared into the falling dusk. The baby stirred in his arms, saw a soft sound, like a sigh hand. Ethan finally looked down. Small. So heartbreakingly small. The infant's face was pale but peaceful, mouth slightly open, one hand curled into a fist against his chest. The blanket was worn, its corners frayed, as if it had been clutched through countless sleepless nights. Ethan stood there for what felt like an eternity. On the porch, alone, holding someone's child, holding someone's world. The envelope in his hand shook. He couldn't breathe. He looked toward the corner where the woman had vanished, half expecting, half praying that she would return, say it was a mistake, take him back. But the street was empty now. Even the birds seemed to have gone silent. The wind picked up slightly, brushing fallen leaves across the sidewalk like whispers. It was only then, as he stared down at the bundle in his arms, that the full weight of what had just happened began to settle. This baby had been left with him. Him. Not a fire station. Not a hospital. But their door. He slowly stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The silence in the house was deafening now. No keyboard clacking, no soft jazz, no Lena. Just the faint creak of floorboards under his socks and the rising thunder of his own heartbeat. He walked to the couch, sank down carefully, the baby still in his arms. Everything felt fragile, unreal. The envelope sat unopened in his palm. With trembling fingers, Ethan peeled back the flap. Inside was a letter, handwritten. The edges were damp from the woman's grip. The paper, slightly smudged, where her tears had fallen. The ink wavered words scratched out and rewritten, as if she had struggled to find the right ones. He didn't read it. Not yet. Instead, he looked back down at the baby's still closed, chest rising gently. The faintest hint of a freckle graced his left temple. His cheeks were flushed, warm, and soft beneath the dim lamplight. Ethan swallowed hard. What just happened? He whispered into the stillness. He wasn't a man given to tears. He preferred logic, plans, the comfort of the known. But in that moment, none of that mattered, because everything he thought he knew had just changed. And the baby in his arms, utterly defenseless, utterly innocent, was now part of his life. Somehow, some way, outside, the last of the sunlight slipped away, and darkness gently filled the corners of their quiet home. The door creaked open just after 8 p.m., followed by the soft thud of Lena's footsteps on the hardwood floor. She was tired bone, tired the kind of weariness that seeps in after 12 hours of code blues, fluorescent lights, and too many goodbyes. Her shoulder bag slid off with a sigh as she kicked off her shoes by the door. "Ethan?" she called gently, expecting his usual reply from the office. But what met her instead was silence. Heavy, tense. She rounded the corner toward the living room and froze. There, seated on the edge of the couch, illuminated by the lamp's amber glow, was Ethan. He looked like a statue, hunched forward, elbows on knees, both hands wrapped protectively around a baby swaddled in a pale blue blanket. His eyes, usually so composed, were wide, disoriented, raw. Lena blinked, confusion surging like a wave. "Whose baby is that?" Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like he might break. Wordlessly, he held out a crumpled letter, the same one he had yet to finish reading in full. His hand shook slightly. Lena didn't move right away. Her eyes flicked from the baby to Ethan to the envelope. Her breath caught. "You need to tell me what's going on," she said, stepping closer, her voice low but firm like a nurse assessing trauma in a triage room. He swallowed hard. "A woman came, about an hour ago. She left him with me. Just handed him over. Said she couldn't do it anymore and that he was..." His voice faltered. "Hours now." Lena reached for the letter, her fingers grazing Ethan's in the handoff. She sat beside him, but the space between them felt miles wide. Together they unfolded the paper and read. "To the kind nurse who held my hand when no one else did." Lena's eyes immediately welled. The handwriting was hurried, but careful. The words trembled across the page like a confession trying to stay brave. The woman's name was Carla. She had given birth 3 months ago to the little boy now nestled in Ethan's arms. A boy who, after a traumatic birth, was diagnosed with paralysis from the waist, down likely permanent. Carla wrote of the father walking out the moment he learned of it, of her own parents refusing to help, of friends who quietly disappeared. Shame and loneliness pressed in from all sides until they drowned out even the will to try. And yet, she remembered Lena, the nurse who stayed past her shift, who braided her hair when no one visited, who whispered, "You're not alone," when the contractions hit hardest. She was kind when no one else was, the letter read. "And I remembered her eyes. That's why I'm choosing you." Lena's breath hitched. She said, "She saw me?" she whispered almost to herself. Ethan nodded, watching her. The letter went on to explain that Carla had tried harder than anyone knew, but depression had taken root. The fear of hurting her child more by staying in a place of darkness had become unbearable. And so, in an act of equal desperation and hope, she had made the decision to leave him with the only person she believed could love him enough. Enclosed with the letter was an unofficial custody agreement signed by Carla, relinquishing her rights. But no last name, no medical records, no birth certificate, just a baby. And a plea. "Please love him like I never could." Lena wiped at her eyes, barely breathing. "My God." Ethan didn't speak. He just kept looking down at the baby, whose little mouth moved in his sleep as if suckling some invisible comfort. "His name?" Lena asked. She didn't say. The silence between them stretched. Lena stood, began pacing one hand over her mouth. The nurse in her was already calculating next steps. Pediatric evaluation, emergency contact, spinal MRI, feeding schedule. But the woman in Hertha, one who had once dreamed of rocking her own baby in this very living room, she was shaking. "This isn't real. This can't be happening." Ethan looked up. "It is." She turned toward him. "We're not parents, Ethan." "No," he said gently. "But we're human. And he's here." Lena stared at the baby, at the small fist peeking from the blanket, at the curve of his cheek against Ethan's arm. He was beautiful. He was someone's everything. 100 reasons swirled through her mind: legal obstacles, medical costs, emotional upheaval. This wasn't how people became parents. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. But her heart Her heart had already crossed a line. She walked over slowly, knelt in front of Ethan, and reached up to trace a finger across the baby's tiny forehead. He stirred, eyelids fluttering open for the first time. And in that moment, when those small brown eyes met hers, everything shifted. The room stilled. The air thickened. She felt it, not fear, not panic, but something deeper. A pull. As if some unseen thread had tied her to this child long before tonight. Ethan whispered, "What do we do, Lena?" Her voice came softer than a breath. "We keep him." Tears clung to her lashes, but her voice was steady now. "We keep him. We care for him. We fight for him." She looked up at her husband, who had never looked more unsure and never more tender. "I don't care how this started. He's here. That's all that matters." Ethan nodded slowly, his jaw tight with emotion. He looked down at the child again. "We need to give him a name." Lena didn't hesitate. "Noah." Why Noah? Because it means rest, peace. And after everything he's been through, he deserves that. Ethan smiled faintly. "Noah River Miller." Lena smiled through her tears. "Welcome home, Noah." Outside, the wind picked up gently, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. Inside, in the quiet center of a once-empty home, a new family had just begun to take shape. The sun had long since slipped behind the rooftops, and Birchwood Street was cloaked in shadows when the Miller house transformed into something it had never been before, a nursery. Or rather, the idea of one, because the guest room where Ethan now stood wasn't equipped for a baby, not even close. He stared blankly at the dusty storage boxes stacked in one corner, the folded futon in the other, and the lone lamp that cast long, soft shadows across the beige walls. In the center of it all, nestled inside the carry cot Carla had left behind, was Noah, asleep but stirring. His small breaths were short, uneven, as if even in dreams he wasn't fully at rest. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't enough," he murmured. From the hallway came the rustle of a trash bag. Lena entered the room balancing diapers, a half-full bottle, and what looked like a hastily cleaned burp cloth. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just safe," she said, though the tremble in her voice betrayed the confidence she was trying to wear. The house once so quiet was now humming with tension. Bottles boiled in the kitchen. The water heater struggled to keep up. A list of emergency pediatricians blinked on Lena's phone screen, and the grocery app had already flagged 6 urgent baby-related purchases. Noah let out a small whimper, then another, then a full cry, sharp, high-pitched, urgent. Lena moved instantly, scooping him into her arms with practiced grace, bouncing gently, whispering something soft and rhythmic. Ethan stood frozen for a second before springing into action, grabbing the bottle from the counter. "I think he's hungry," he said, handing it to her. Lena took it, tested the temperature on her wrist, and winced. "Too hot." "Oh, I thought." "It's okay," she said quickly, not unkindly. "Just run it under cold water for a bit." Ethan obeyed, rushing back to the kitchen. His hands fumbled with the faucet, knocking over a spoon in the sink. Water splashed across the counter. In the background, Noah's cries rose in pitch. They pierced something at Ethan's chest, something raw, unfamiliar, helpless. He returned moments later, breathless, with the bottle finally cooled. Lena tried feeding Noah, but he turned his face away, fussing. "I don't think he likes this kind of nipple," she murmured, shifting him into a new position. "Did you see another one in the bag?" Ethan glanced toward the front hallway, where Carla's canvas tote bag still lay unopened. "I'll check." He knelt and opened the zipper slowly. Inside, one spare onesie, a container of formula, a small stuffed bear missing an eye, and a sealed plastic bag with another bottle nipple inside. He held it up triumphantly, the tiniest hint of success blooming in his chest. But the second he returned, Noah let out a shriek, a real one. Lena winced. "That's pain. What do we do?" "I think it's gas. He might need to be burped. Can you?" Ethan stepped forward and reached for the baby, then hesitated. His arms stiffened at his sides. Lena looked at him. "Just hold him up against your chest. Firm, but gentle." He nodded, swallowing hard, then reached out and cradled Noah awkwardly. The baby felt heavier than he looked, not in weight, but in meaning. Ethan adjusted his grip, patted the baby's back with unsure hands. Noah cried harder. Ethan's confidence cracked. "He hates me." Lena let out a tired, dry laugh. "He's 3 months old. He hates everything right now. I think I'm going to break him. You won't, she said, coming over. She placed her hands over Ethan's, guiding the motion. Babies aren't porcelain. They're tougher than they look. After a few uncertain pats, Noah gave a soft hiccup. Then another. Then let out a tiny, wet burp. The crying stopped. Ethan froze. Did I do that? Lena smiled. You did. They stood there for a beat, Ethan holding Noah against his chest, the baby finally quiet. In that stillness, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it lessened, made room for awe. Ethan looked down. Noah's small fingers had curled around the fabric of his shirt, holding on with startling strength for something so small. His head rested just under Ethan's chin, warm and perfectly still. I can feel his heartbeat, Ethan whispered. I know, Lena said. Isn't it wild? He nodded slowly. His voice came out softer than before. It's like he doesn't even know how close the world came to forgetting him. Lena sat on the edge of the futon, exhaustion sinking into her shoulders. Well, he won't be forgotten now. They spent the rest of the night trading shifts. There were more missteps. Ethan forgot to fasten the diaper tightly in Otwis. Lena used the wrong formula, to water ratio once, and had to remake the bottle. They both panicked when Noah spit up, momentarily convinced he was choking. But there were also moments that caught them off guard. Noah fell asleep for 10 whole minutes on Ethan's chest while he stood near the living room window, gently swaying. Lena hummed an old lullaby from her childhood, and Noah responded with a sound that could almost be mistaken for a laugh. And just after 3 a.m., while Lena dozed off for 15 minutes with her head on Ethan's shoulder, Noah stirred, looked up at them both, and smiled. A real smile. The kind that cracks something open inside you. By the time dawn began to creep across the sky, painting the living room in soft grays and golds, Ethan and Lena sat side by side on the couch. Noah was asleep, bundled between them like a small miracle they hadn't asked for but could no longer imagine letting go. Neither of them spoke, but in the silence, there was an understanding unspoken, unshakable. Whatever storm this was, they were in it together now. The rain had begun sometime before dawn, soft and steady drumming gently against the car windshield, like a lullaby that refused to end. It was the kind of gray morning where even time seemed reluctant to move forward, and everything felt slightly blurred at the edges. Lena glanced in the rearview mirror. Noah, bundled in a fresh onesie with tiny star patterns, slept quietly in the car seat, his small chest rising and falling in rhythmic peace. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, hands clasped, thumb anxiously tapping against his wedding ring. Dr. Kaminsky has been with pediatrics for 15 years, Lena said, trying to steady her own nerves. She's seen everything. She'll be kind. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed outside the window, watching a woman in scrubs walk quickly across the wet sidewalk. I don't know what to expect, he finally said. What if she says it's worse than we thought? Lena reached over and touched his hand. Then we deal with it. Together. Inside the clinic, the sterile scent of hand sanitizer and freshly printed forms filled the air. The receptionist gave a surprised glance when Lena explained their situation, but quickly guided them into a private exam room, one with soft lighting, animal murals on the walls, and a rocking chair in the corner that creaked slightly with movement. They waited in silence, the room too quiet. Ethan paced near the sink, stopping only to peek into Noah's carrier every few seconds. Lena filled out the forms, her handwriting more careful than usual. When the door finally opened, Dr. Kaminsky entered with the practiced calm of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing compassion and clinical precision. She was in her early 50s, hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun, glasses perched low on her nose, but her smile was warm. You must be the Millers, she said, shaking their hands. And this must be little Noah. Lena nodded. He hasn't been seen since birth. We don't have much medical history, just what his mother left in a note. Dr. Kaminsky's expression grew gentle. Then let's take a look and see what we can learn. Over the next half hour, she worked methodically checking Noah's vitals, reflexes, pupil response, spine alignment. Lena watched like a hawk, absorbing every word. Ethan sat stiffly in the corner, fingers fidgeting with the hem of his jacket, pretending not to flinch each time Noah whimpered. When the exam ended, Dr. Kaminsky washed her hands, pulled up a stool, and sat down with a sigh that was equal parts tired and thoughtful. From what I can assess right now, Noah's paralysis is neurologically centered in the lower spinal cord, likely due to a traumatic birth or early inflammation. Lena nodded slowly, processing. Is it permanent? Ethan asked, voice tight. The doctor hesitated. In many cases, yes, but children's nervous systems are remarkably adaptive. I can't promise recovery, but I also can't rule out potential for improvement. Some babies born with similar presentations grow up to walk with assistance. Others don't walk but live full, joyful lives. She paused, her tone growing softer. What I can tell you is this. He's healthy. He's responsive. He knows when he's safe. That's a very good sign. Lena exhaled slowly, as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. Ethan leaned forward. So, this isn't a life sentence? No, Dr. Kaminsky said with conviction. It's a different path. Not an easy one, but absolutely a life worth living. She placed a gentle hand on Lena's arm. You've already given him more than some kids ever get: warmth, stability, a chance. And based on how he reacts to your voices, I'd say he knows he's loved. A long silence followed. Ethan looked at his wife, then down at the baby still cooing softly in the crook of Lena's arm. Dr. Kaminsky smiled, as if sensing the unspoken weight in the room. Would you like to hold him, Ethan? Ethan looked startled. Me? He knows your voice too, she said. That counts for something. Lena didn't say anything. She simply turned, slowly, and held out Noah. Ethan hesitated. His hands hovered for a second. Then, carefully like learning how to breathe underwater, he reached out and took Noah into his arms. It was different this time. He wasn't panicked, wasn't stiff. His shoulders lowered a little. His arms curved around Noah's tiny body like they belonged there. Noah blinked up at him, calm, curious, content. Ethan swallowed hard. I thought I'd be more afraid, he whispered. You are, Lena said gently. But you're doing it anyway. Noah let out a soft noise, something between a sigh and a human nestled his face into the crook of Ethan's neck. Ethan closed his eyes. Something shifted in him. It wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real. Something inside a man who once clung to order and certainty cracked open just enough to let someone else in. He looked up, voice thick. We're really doing this, aren't we? Lena nodded, her own eyes glassy. We already are. Doctor. Kaminsky stood to leave, handing them a folder filled with therapy resources, pediatric neurologists, and early intervention programs. I want to see him again in 2 weeks, she said. And you both of you, you're doing beautifully. Don't forget that. They left the clinic under the same gray sky. But somehow, it didn't feel as heavy. Back in the car, Ethan sat in the back seat with Noah the whole ride home. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His arm rested protectively across the car seat, and every now and then, he reached over and gently brushed the blanket down, revealing the baby's sleeping face. And for the first time, it didn't feel like they were carrying someone else's child. It felt like they were carrying their son. The old courthouse sat on a quiet corner of Maple and 3rd, its stone columns washed in late afternoon sun. It wasn't grand, no sweeping steps, no ornate statues, but there was something solid and enduring about it, like the kind of place that had seen 1,000 stories come through its doors and never once flinched. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. Ethan kept adjusting the diaper bag slung over his shoulder, while Lena cradled Noah tightly in a soft blue wrap across her chest. The infant slept, cheeks pink from the cold, tiny hand curled against her collarbone. They waited in a private office, papers spread across the long walnut table. On the far wall hung an oil painting of the state seal, faded from sunlight. A pot of stale coffee sat untouched. The door creaked open, and Margaret Beale entered, a lawyer in her early 60s, silver hair twisted into a careful bun, glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, thank you for coming in on short notice. Ethan stood immediately, instinctive. Thank you for seeing us. Margaret motioned for them to sit as she lowered herself into the leather chair across from them. She placed a manila folder in front of her and tapped it once, then opened it with delicate precision. I've reviewed the note the birth mother left, as well as the envelope containing her personal statement and unsigned custody form. She paused, scanning their faces. Normally, this would raise red flags. But in this case, the letter is detailed, intentional, and clearly references both of you by name. Your employment, your address, even the coffee mug on your front porch. Lena looked down, heart thudding. It doesn't constitute legal custody, Margaret clarified, but it gives us a foundation to petition for emergency guardianship and eventually full adoption. You'll need to go before a family court judge. We'll run background checks, home visits, the usual. And what if the birth mother comes back? Ethan asked. Margaret didn't sugarcoat. If she returns and files a petition within a set period, she can contest, but she flipped a page, revealing a photograph. This woman didn't just abandon the child. She entrusted him deliberately and with information that shows intent. That matters. It tells the court she made a choice. Lena felt a lump form in her throat. What are the chances we keep him? Margaret's eyes softened. If you follow every step, file properly, stay honest, very high. There was a long, quiet beat, just the soft hum of a heater in the wall, and the faint rustle of Noah shifting against Lena's chest. Ethan leaned back in his chair, hands resting on the edge of the table. We're not trying to take anything that's not ours. Buth is here. He's in our arms. He needs someone to fight for him. Margaret studied him for a long second. Then she smiled, small, measured. You're already doing it. She slid 2 forms across the table. We'll file the guardianship motion first thing Monday. I suggest preparing a written statement your intent to raise him, your acknowledgement of his medical condition, and why you believe this placement is in his best interest. Lena nodded. We'll get it to you tonight. As they stood to leave, Margaret's gaze lingered on Noah, who had begun to stir, his face scrunching in a soft baby frown. Little guy doesn't know it yet, she murmured, but he's already part of a miracle. Back home, Lena sat on the edge of the couch, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea. Ethan paced near the window, cell phone pressed to his ear. Just ask her if she wants to talk, Lena whispered. Ethan nodded. She's picking up. There was a click. Then, hello? Hey, Amelia, it's Ethan. A pause. Then, hey, this is a surprise. Yeah, he said. We needed to talk to someone about something real. Lena leaned in closer, hearing her sister's voice through the receiver. What's going on? Amelia asked. Ethan hesitated. We're fostering. Or we're about to. A baby. A beat of silence. Fostering? Amelia's tone was cautious. You mean through the agency? No, Lena said, taking the phone from Ethan's hand. Not exactly. There was something in Lena's voices, soft, tired, but deeply certain. She explained what had happened. The knock, the letter, the diagnosis, the attorney. Every word landed with weight, but she didn't dress anything up. When she finished, the line went quiet. You've only had him for a few days, Amelia said finally. How do you even know you're ready for this? Lena swallowed hard. We don't, she said quietly. But when I look at him, when I hear his breathing against my chest, or the way he quiets when Ethan holds him, I know one thing. She looked at Ethan, her voice steady. He's already ours. The words hung in the air like a truth no one could argue with. Amelia sighed on the other end. Not frustrated, just unsure. I just don't want to see you get hurt, Lena. I know, Lena whispered. But sometimes love looks like a risk. She handed the phone back to Ethan. She'll come around. Ethan didn't respond. He walked toward the nursery, where Noah lay asleep in the bassinet, one hand splayed open as if reaching for something in a dream. He stood there for a long time, watching the child they hadn't planned for, but who had somehow rearranged the very shape of their lives. In that moment, it didn't matter what court said, or papers, or lawyers. This was family. And no judge on earth could explain what it felt like to fall in love with a child you never expected, but now couldn't imagine life without. The fog hung thick that morning, so dense it seemed to press against the window panes like a living thing. Dawn hadn't fully broken. Instead, the yard was bathed in that strange blue-tinted quiet that only arrives before the world remembers it's supposed to wake up. Lena stood at the kitchen sink, cradling a mug of half-drunk tea. Noah had just fallen asleep again after a long night of restlessness. His tiny frame curled into the softness of the bassinet like a comma in a sentence too big for him. She rubbed her eyes, glanced out the window, and froze. Something moved at the edge of the fog. A shape, low, steady, watching. She pressed her forehead to the glass. The backyard fence, a weathered stretch of wood near the forest's edge, had a break in the corner where old storms had knocked 2 slats loose. And right there, half concealed by bramble and mist, a dog. Number. Not just a dog, a German shepherd. He was large, even from a distance, though thin ribs visible beneath the mess of his coat. His fur was mottled with dirt, mud, and something darker near the left flank that looked like dried blood. One paw barely touched the ground, held up in a trembling hover, but his eyes sharp, amber, half hidden behind the fogware, painfully alert. Not wild, not quite, not lost either, just waiting. Lena set the mug down and opened the door slowly. The cold bit into her bare arms, but she didn't flinch. The figure didn't move, only shifted slightly, ears perking at the creak of the hinges. "Hey there," she whispered, stepping barefoot onto the porch. The dog's head lowered just a fraction, not aggressive, not friendly, cautious, wounded. She crossed the grass slowly, hands visible, as if approaching something ancient and holy. When she got within 10 feet, she dropped to her knees in the dew-wet grass. "You're hurt," she said softly. The shepherd didn't retreat. His chest rose and fell, fog making his breath visible. That's when she saw it. The collar, frayed, cracked leather, and just barely legible. Beneath the grime and weather, Gyhdeksen, Rex, Unit 42 Delta. Her heart kicked. "Ethan!" she called out, but didn't turn. "Come out here!" Slowly. Moments later, she heard the door open behind her. Ethan appeared, groggy and barefoot, sweater half-buttoned. "Lena, it's 6 in the—" He stopped mid-step when he saw the dog. "What the hell?" "I think he's injured," Lena said, not looking away. "And trained." Ethan squinted. "How do you know that?" "Tag. Says K9. Military. Or police." Ethan's brows pulled together, suspicion darkening his face. "That doesn't mean he's safe. Could be feral. Could be traumatized. You don't know what he's been through." "I don't," she said gently, "but I know what it looks like to be scared and alone." She reached out her hand. Slowly, palm up. The shepherd didn't move. Seconds passed. Then he limped forward. One step, then another. When his nose brushed her palm, Ethan cursed under his breath. Lena let out the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She moved closer and carefully touched the matted fur behind his ear. The dog flinched, but didn't run. "There's blood," she murmured. "His paw looks infected." "Lena, we can't leave him like this." Ethan exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. "We just got Noah. We're still figuring out how to keep a newborn alive. And now you want to bring in an injured, possibly aggressive, working dog we know nothing about?" She looked up at him. "I don't want to," she said, and then softer. "I have to." That stopped him. The dog looked between them, waiting, silent. Ethan sighed. "At least let me get a towel." They laid the shepherd on an old comforter in the mudroom, where the heat vent hummed quietly beneath the tile. Lena moved gently, using scissors to trim away clumps of mud and dried leaves while Ethan held the flashlight. The dog's body was a patchwork of scratches, old scars, and one fresh puncture wound near the flank. "I think this is a bullet graze," Ethan muttered, inspecting the edge. The dog didn't whine, didn't growl, just trembled, eyes following Lena's every movement. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "Where'd you come from?" After she disinfected the paw, the shepherd curled into a tight ball on the blanket, nose tucked beneath his leg like he finally allowed himself to rest. Lena sat beside him for a long moment, just watching the way his chest rose and fell steady now. Trust wasn't earned in an hour, but this wasn't the look of a beast. It was the look of something that had once belonged and didn't anymore. Later that morning, Noah woke with a hoarse cry. Lena scooped him up and swayed gently in the nursery, while Ethan watched the shepherd from the doorway. "We're not a shelter," he said quietly. "We're barely holding it together." "I know," Lena replied, rocking Noah gently. "But I don't think this is just a dog." She turned toward Ethan, voice steady. "I think he came here for a reason." The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet fur. The walls were painted a soft green, the kind that was meant to calm animals but didn't do much for Ethan's nerves. He sat stiffly in the corner chair, arms crossed, while Lena knelt beside the steel exam table, where Axel stood, panting. The German shepherd was quiet but tense, muscles coiled under his matted coat. His eyes followed every motion of the vet. Dr. Reiner, a woman in her 50s with calm hands and eyes that had seen it all. She clicked her tongue and gently lifted Axel's injured paw. "He let you disinfect this?" she asked Lena, impressed. "He let me," Lena replied, voice soft. "Ethan, not so much." Ethan muttered something about common sense and being bitten. Dr. Reiner examined the tags, what was left of them. K9, all right, but the ID is almost illegible. I'll try to run it through the regional database, but if he was decommissioned more than 5 years ago or belonged to a discontinued unit, we might not get anything. She palpated the dog's sides. He's underweight, dehydrated, moderate muscle atrophy. That paw wound might have been left untreated for over a week. Can you tell if he's been abused? Lena asked gently. Reiner hesitated. Not overtly, but his reactions are telling. Doesn't flinch from a woman's hand, but watch this. M. She moved quickly, mimicking a sudden gesture, raising a hand. Palm open. Axel's whole body tensed, ears flat. He didn't snap, but his tail sank low, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Ethan stepped forward. He's afraid of men? Reiner nodded. Not uncommon, especially in dogs that were trained too harshly or discarded. Lena reached for Axel, fingers threading gently behind his ears. He leaned into her touch with a kind of gravity that pulled at Ethan's gut. Did he pass a temperament test? Reiner gave a dry smile. He passed something, but this isn't a regular rescue. He's not a clean slate. He has a past hand. You'll feel it in the room with you. Ethan met her eyes. Is it safe? With a baby in the house? Reiner's expression was careful. That's your call. But dogs like this don't forget. They don't forgive easily. And sometimes, they're not here to be pets. Back home, the air felt heavier. Axel limped into the mudroom and dropped to the floor with a groan. Lena brought him a blanket and set a bowl of warm chicken broth beside it. He licked it slowly, eyes darting toward the hallway. Noah's cries echoed faintly through the baby monitor. Lena stood up, already moving. I'll get him, she said, disappearing toward the nursery. Ethan stayed. Axel lifted his head. You watching over him? Ethan muttered. Or watching for something? The shepherd didn't blink. That night, the tension sharpened. Axel refused to settle. He followed Lena from room to room, tail low but nose alert, as if sniffing for something that hadn't arrived yet. When she laid Noah down in the crib, Axel lingered by the doorframe, eyes pinned on the tiny form bundled in blankets. Too close, Ethan murmured, pulling the baby gate across the nursery threshold. Axel didn't growl, but he didn't leave either. At 1:04 a.m., the barking started. Loud, sudden, ferocious. Ethan jolted awake, heart hammering. Jesus! He grabbed the flashlight and rushed into the hallway, nearly colliding with Lena as she emerged from the nursery, Noah crying in her arms. Axel stood in the kitchen, rigid and snarling, eyes locked on the back door. What is it? Ethan demanded, scanning the shadows. Raccoon? Coyote? Lena hushed Noah against her chest. He doesn't bark like that for animals. Axel lunged forward, paw against the glass, growling deep, then stopped. The silence after was almost worse. His ears twitched. Then he backed up, whined once, and lay flat on the floor. Ethan opened the door and stepped out into the cold. Nothing. No movement. No tracks in the frost-covered dirt. When he returned inside, Lena was sitting on the floor beside Axel, her free hand stroking his back. The dog was shaking. He's terrified, she whispered. Of what? She looked up. I think he remembers something he's not ready to tell. By morning, the house was quiet again. But the rhythm had shifted. Axel refused to eat until Lena sat beside him. He followed Noah's scent trail with obsession, circling the crib, pacing the nursery. Sometimes, when the baby cooed or shifted in his sleep, Axel would let out a low, anxious whimper. He doesn't know what he's supposed to protect, Lena murmured one afternoon, watching the dog lie with his chin on the bassinet's edge. Or who he's protecting from, Ethan added. Axel looked up then, as if understanding, as if trying to decide whether these strangers were his mission or his memory. The mornings had grown quieter since Axel's arrival, though not necessarily calmer. The once familiar sounds of a household learning to raise a newborn, soft lullabies, bottle sterilizers whirring, the gentle creak of the rocking chair now folded into the heavier silence of something else lingering in the air. Memory. Ethan laced his boots slowly, his hands moving with a kind of deliberation that only came after doubt. "Come on, boy," he said, not entirely sure if Axel would follow. The German shepherd lifted his head from where he lay by the mudroom heater. His ears twitched. His body didn't move. Ethan sighed, grabbed the leash, and rattled it once. That did it. Axel stood not eagerly, but purposefully. He approached like a soldier answering a call, not a pet going for a walk. His gait still favored the injured paw, but he didn't complain. He never did. Outside, the frost had not yet melted from the tips of the grass. The sidewalk shimmered with a thin glaze of morning dew, and the winter sun hung low like it hadn't quite made up its mind about showing up for the day. They walked in silence. No tugs, no sniffing. Just the sound of Ethan's boots crunching gravel and Axel's steady, rhythmic breath at his side. "You don't bark much when it's just us," Ethan muttered, glancing sideways. "Maybe that's the trick, leave the baby behind and suddenly we're friends." Axel didn't so much as flick an ear. But Ethan noticed the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. Mailbox, rusted swing set, a crow perched on a lamppost, always watching, always assessing, just like he used to. "Were you like this on patrol too?" Ethan asked, voice softening. Quiet, calculated, not giving anyone more than they'd earned? The shepherd slowed slightly, and for the briefest moment, their steps aligned. And though Ethan wouldn't admit it aloud, not yet something about that rhythm, that wordless pacing, felt eerily familiar. Like the old hymn had somehow been folded into this animal's stride. It took 3 days of walking for Axel to stop keeping a 2-foot gap. On the 4th morning, Ethan clipped the leash and felt Axel's body brush against his leg as they stepped out the front door. It was subtle, barely there, but it was enough. That night, Ethan tossed an old tennis ball into the hallway, just to see what would happen. Axel didn't chase it, but he did watch it roll, and his ears perked when it hit the baseboard and bounced back. Ethan chuckled under his breath. "I'll take that as a maybe." The house had settled into a fragile routine. Lena worked night shifts again, trusting Ethan to manage feedings and diaper changes with increasing success. Axel had learned the sound of the formula canister opening and would trot to the kitchen as if summoned. He never begged, just watched. Sometimes, when Noah cried in the night, Ethan would find Axel already standing by the cryblert, but still, as if his instincts woke him a split second before the humans ever stirred. But Axel still wouldn't meet Ethan's gaze. Not directly. Not for long. It was as if the dog had drawn a line between present and belonging, and while he had agreed to show up, he hadn't yet decided to stay. It happened quietly on a Tuesday night. Lena was gone. Noah had finally fallen asleep after a long stretch of inconsolable crying, the kind that exhausted the whole house. Ethan sat on the hallway floor, back against the wall, bottle still half full in his hand. "I don't know what you want from us," he whispered, not even sure who he was speaking to, himself, the baby, or the dog who stood watching. Axel was in the doorway of the nursery, not growling, not pacing, just present. Ethan sighed. "He's not a threat. He's not broken. He's just different. Like you." Axel's ears tilted forward. He stepped inside. Ethan didn't stop him. The dog crossed the room slowly and lay down next to the crib, tucking his legs beneath him, his head resting near one wooden spindle. He exhaled, and Noah, in his sleep, gave a quiet murmur, like he knew. Ethan rose and watched them, man, dog, and child all suspended in a kind of quiet that felt sacred. "I don't need you to love us yet," Ethan whispered, stepping backward. "But maybe don't give up on us either." From that night on, Axel chose the crib. Every dusk, he'd pace the nursery until the moment Noah was laid down, and then he'd lie beside it, silent sentinel, eyes heavy but never truly closed. Still, he wouldn't make eye contact. Not with Ethan, not even with Lena, not directly. But when Noah cried, He was first. When the mail truck rumbled too close, he was a wall between door and baby. And once, when Lena accidentally dropped a glass in the kitchen, the shatter startled Ethan, but it was Axel who moved first, pressing himself gently against the baby's bassinet until the room stilled again. He wasn't affectionate. He didn't lick or nuzzle. He didn't wag. But he was there. One evening, as Ethan sat beside the bassinet with a bottle in hand, he caught something small. Axel sniffed Noah's blanket and recoiled slightly. Not in disgust, but in confusion. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Axel sat down, ears pinned slightly back. His eyes moved not to Ethan, not to the blanket, but to Noah. Not fear, not aggression, but recognition. And in that long, quiet moment, Ethan felt it too. Like Axel knew something. Something no one else could feel. Something that hadn't yet revealed itself. He whispered, "You smell something, don't you?" Axel didn't move, but the air in the room shifted, as if a whisper had passed through them all, just beyond the range of human hearing. Mornings in the house no longer felt like chaos. They felt like choreography, a practiced, imperfect rhythm, but rhythm nonetheless. Lena moved through it with quiet precision. She tied her hair into a messy bun in the kitchen while the coffee brewed, bouncing Noah gently on her hip, whispering little songs under her breath. Her hospital badge already clipped to her collar, her eyes tired, but present. Ethan sat across from her at the kitchen table, laptop open, untouched. A Word document blinked with a blank page. The cursor pulsed like a metronome, steady, silent, accusatory. He hadn't written a single line. Noah let out a small squeal, the kind that wasn't quite laughter but no longer pain. It broke the silence like birdsong. Lena smiled. "That's your cue," she said, placing the baby gently into Ethan's arms. Ethan caught him awkwardly still, never quite graceful, and then held him close, his large hands cradling the boy's small frame as if he might break at any moment. But Noah didn't protest. His little hand reached for Ethan's shirt collar and latched on like a memory. Axel stood in the corner of the kitchen, watching. His ears were alert, tail motionless. He'd taken to this habit of standing guard during feeding time, like a silent shift change. He rarely barked anymore, but his presence filled every room. The days were carved into rituals. Morning feedings, physical therapy appointments at the children's hospital, diaper changes, email check-ins, shuttling between grocery lists and Noah's specialized formula orders. Somewhere in the background, the snow kept falling. Quiet, constant. Like a slow erasure of the old life. Ethan drove them to therapy most mornings. The hospital lobby had become familiar, its antiseptic brightness, the buzz of vending machines, the soft murmur of conversations in waiting areas that never quite reached full volume. Families passed like ghosts, all moving under the same silent weight of learning how to raise a child who didn't fit inside the world as it had been imagined. Dr. Peretti greeted them with gentle warmth, always with a hand on Noah's tiny shoulder. He had a way of speaking to the child like he was already older, already strong. "You're going to do things your own way, little man," he said once, as he adjusted the braces on Noah's legs. "But you'll get there. One crawl, one roll, 1 inch at a time." Ethan listened, nodded, said nothing. Some days he sat in the car afterward, engine running, watching the windshield frost over. Other days he drove in silence while Noah babbled in the back seat, his voice full of sounds that had no words but carried something close to trust. Lena's shifts stretched long, 12, sometimes 14 hours. Pediatric ICU never truly slept, and she never really came home rested. But when she did, she dropped her bags at the door, peeled off her shoes, and went straight to Noah. She'd press her lips to his hair and inhale like his scent could undo whatever she'd seen that day. Blood, blue lights, parents screaming into pillows in waiting rooms. She never brought it omenade, really, but Ethan knew it lived behind her eyes. "What are you thinking?" she asked one night as they folded laundry on the couch. Ethan paused mid-fold, holding one of Noah's impossibly tiny onesies in his hands. "That I'm here every day and still feel like I'm falling behind." Lena sat beside him, their knees touching. "We're learning in different ways," she said softly. "You're figuring out how to stay. That landed deeper than she'd intended. Ethan looked away, jaw clenched. She reached over and placed her hand on his. "And he's watching you do it." They sat there in silence. The baby monitor crackled with white noise in the background. Somewhere upstairs, Axel paced. Axel had grown even more protective, not aggressive in her, but tuned in, always a few steps away, always watching. He followed Lena when she carried Noah, waited outside the bathroom door when Ethan bathed him. Saturday, just beneath the crib when the house went still at night, but tension coiled in him like a spring. He wouldn't play, wouldn't eat unless someone was in the room. Sometimes he paced the hall in the dark, nails clicking softly against the wood floor, eyes sweeping the windows as if expecting something to come through them. Once, Ethan found Axel staring at the back fence at 2 a.m., growling low but not loud. Just a warning, not bark, not panic, like something in the wind didn't sit right with him. He watched shadows. He tracked silence. And every time he came near Noah, it was with an almost reverent stillness, as if the boy was not just fragile but sacred. The routines deepened their roles. Lena the compass, steady and unshaken. Ethan the silent student, learning how to speak in gestures instead of plans. Noah the center of every orbit without ever asking to be. And Axel the wall between them and something they could not yet name. One snowy evening, as Ethan rocked Noah in the nursery, he looked over to see Axel seated beside the crib knot, lying down like usual, but upright, alert. "Is it always going to be like this?" Ethan asked. He wasn't speaking to the baby. Axel didn't flinch, just blinked. Ethan sighed. "You're waiting for something. I can feel it." Axel's head tilted, just slightly. Ethan leaned back in the chair. Noah curled against his chest, tiny breaths fogging his collar. "Whatever happened to you?" "I think it's still happening. And maybe," he glanced at the dog, voice low, "maybe it's coming for him too, isn't it?" The room felt heavier. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows. Axel didn't answer, but his posture didn't change. The baby stirred, and the rhythm continued. It started with a sound barely more than a hiccup at first. A gurgle, round and wet, bubbling up from the back of Noah's throat as Ethan lifted him into the sunlight pooling through the kitchen window. Ethan paused mid-motion, unsure if it had been a cough or gas. Then it happened again. Not pain, not discomfort, a laugh. Small, broken into pieces like a puzzle of joy, but unmistakable. Ethan froze. His heart clenched not from fear, but something older, something quieter. Noah laughed again, this time with his whole face. Tiny fists waved in the air. His eyes crinkled, his body shook, and the sound filled the room like a bell. Ethan lowered himself to the floor, holding the baby against his chest as he laughed with Hemat. Nothing in particular, just the absurd, beautiful truth that this boy could laugh. In that moment, it didn't matter that his legs didn't move, that his future was filled with ramps and chairs and surgeries. He was alive. And he laughed. The living room had become a makeshift play area. Woven baskets full of soft toys, a mobile that hung low enough for Noah to swat at, a stack of therapy papers on the coffee table that no one had the heart to read more than once. Lena walked in from the hallway, still in her scrubs, and paused when she saw them. Ethan on the floor, Noah in his arms, both red-faced from laughter. She didn't interrupt. She just stood in the doorway, one hand on her chest, as if holding her own heart in place. But for every forward step with Noah, there was still Axel hovering like a shadow with his own rhythm, his own silent resistance. He no longer growled. He no longer barked at night, but he kept his distance from Ethan with a precision that was hard to ignore. He'd lie near Lena's feet while she nursed Noah. He'd follow her from room to room like an old companion. When she brushed his fur gently at night, he leaned into her hand as if he remembered something softer from before. But when Ethan reached out, Axel would flinch. Not violently, but enough. Enough to sting. At first, Ethan pretended it didn't bother him. Told himself maybe Axel was still adjusting. That trust took time. But deep down, the question lingered. What does he see in me that he still can't trust? Noah's coos became a daily balm. He started responding to music. Lena played lullabies on the old piano in the hallway. and Ethan would catch Noah trying to turn his head toward the sound, his brows furrowed in deep, curious focus. He reached for toys, held onto fingers longer, slept longer stretches at night. And one morning, Ethan watched in silence as Noah gripped a small rattle and shook it without help. It was barely a tremor, but it was his. "He's stronger than I imagined," Ethan whispered, mostly to himself. Lena nodded without looking up. "He was born that way. We just have to catch up." That afternoon, Ethan tried again. He knelt by the back porch, Axel resting a few feet away in the grass. The sun was low, and the wind rolled gently through the pines. Ethan held out a hand, open palm. No command. No expectations. Axel looked at him. Just looked. For a moment, something shifted behind the dog's eyes like a curtain moved, briefly, to show a hallway that led further in. Then it closed again. Axel stood up, walked past him. Didn't growl, didn't run, just chose the long way around. Ethan exhaled slowly. He lowered his hand. "What did I do wrong?" he asked the wind. That night, after Noah was asleep, Lena stood at the sink rinsing bottles, while Ethan sat at the table nursing a second cup of untouched tea. "He still won't come to me," he muttered. Lena looked over her shoulder. "Axel?" He nodded. "It's not just distance. It's like I make him nervous. And I've never hurt him. I've never even raised my voice." "He's trauma-trained," Lena said gently. "He's wired to read more than action. He reads tension." Ethan blinked. "You think he can sense—" "What? That I don't know what I'm doing?" Lena turned off the faucet, wiped her hands on a towel. "I think he senses you're afraid of being a father." The room went quiet. Not angry silence, just a truth hanging in the air like fog. Ethan stared into the mug between his hands. "I don't want to fail him, Lena, or Noah. But every day I wake up and wonder when the real dad is going to walk through that door. The one who knows what he's doing. The one who never hesitates." "You're the real one," she said. "'Cause you're still here." Later that night, Ethan sat beside Noah's crib. The baby slept with one hand curled near his mouth, the soft breaths of dreaming innocence filling the room like waves against a dock. Axel lay nearby, not beside him, but close enough to keep watch. Ethan didn't try to reach out this time. He just sat there, not as a man demanding trust, but as one trying to earn it. "You see through people, don't you?" Ethan whispered. "You know what they carry, even when they smile." Axel's ears twitched. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Well, here's the truth. I'm scared. Every day. Not because of Noah, but because of me." Axel lifted his head. His gaze met Ethan's for the first time in days. And in that stillness, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. A shadow, recognizing another shadow. It started with silence. Not the kind that blankets a sleeping house, but a silence that presses in from all sides, too thick, too still. The kind that makes a mother's breath catch before her mind catches up. Lena had woken just past 2 a.m. to check on Noah. Something unspoken had stirred her instinct, perhaps, or the thin maternal thread that never truly sleeps. She touched his forehead. Her fingers recoiled. It was burning, a furnace under skin far too delicate for fire. "Noah?" Her voice cracked as she leaned closer. "Hey, baby." He stirred, but not with his usual fuss. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. His lips were dry, his body limp. Lena's heartbeat surged, sudden and hard, like a slammed door inside her chest. She called for Ethan. He was already halfway down the hall, Axel pacing beside him as if pulled by the same invisible string. "What's wrong?" "He's burning up," Lena said, barely breathing the words. Ethan leaned in, his hand cupping Noah's cheek. The heat radiated into his palm. "He's not responding." Axel let out a low whine, circling the crib once, then standing guard as Ethan scooped the baby up, already grabbing the car keys with the other hand. The night turned frantic in seconds. No bags packed, no bottles grabbed, just a mother clutching a damp cloth and a father cradling a fragile weight that suddenly felt heavier than the world. The emergency room's fluorescent lights had no sympathy. They buzzed overhead like a swarm, bathing everything in sterile blue. Lena sat in the triage chair, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers that tripped over each other in her throat. Ethan stood at the counter, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Axel wasn't allowed past the sliding glass doors. but he stayed glued to the window outside, his breath fogging the glass, unmoving. "He's spiking at 104, the nurse said quickly. "We're prepping fluids." "Page Dr. Mehta." "Is it an infection?" Ethan asked. "We'll know more after the labs. Could be viral. Could be residual trauma. Has he shown signs of seizure?" "Number he was." He was laughing earlier. "Perfectly fine." The nurse offered the kind of nod reserved for panic-stricken parents, part empathy, part protocol. Sometimes it happens fast. Time bent inside that white room. Every beep from the monitors drilled into Ethan's skull like a countdown he couldn't read. Lena gripped Noah's tiny hand like a rope she refused to let go. Doctors came and went. Questions blurred together. Has he been around anyone sick? Any travel history? Feeding patterns? When did the fever start? Finally, Dr. Mehta arrived, her voice calm but clipped, eyes scanning charts like a battlefield medic. "The labs show signs of elevated white blood cells, likely viral," she began. "But that's not the only concern." Ethan stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "He's showing signs of neuroinflammation," she said. "It could be a post-viral response, but..." "But what?" Lena whispered. "We need to rule out a rare condition, transverse myelitis. Sometimes it mimics or overlaps with paralysis in infants. It can be temporary, but it complicates the prognosis." Lena shook her head. "You're saying this isn't from the accident?" "We can't say for certain yet. But if it's immune-mediated, the paralysis may not be entirely spinal. It may be evolving." The words landed like glass shattering in the room. Ethan looked at Noah Teeny, wrapped in wires, eyelids fluttering in fevered dreams. "How much worse can it get?" Ethan asked hoarsely. "We're not losing him," Lena said, more to herself than anyone. "I don't care what name they give it. We are not losing him." In the waiting room, time lost its shape. Ethan stood near the vending machine, staring through the fogged window where Axel still sat, unmoving in the rain. The dog had refused to leave. Even when Ethan cracked the window to tell him to go home, he just stared back, ears low, eyes locked on the ICU doors. Ethan pressed his forehead to the cool glass. "You knew something was coming," he muttered. "Didn't you?" Behind him, Lena emerged with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes ringed with fatigue and fury. "They're starting him on antivirals and monitoring spinal pressure. We're staying overnight, maybe longer." "Is..." Ethan nodded, unable to form words. For a while, they just stood there, two people stitched together by fear and the threat of a child fighting for breath. At 3:47 a.m., the fever broke. Noah whimpered weakly in his crib, the glaze lifting slowly from his eyes. Lena was the first to move, cradling his damp head against her neck. Ethan sat beside them, resting one hand on the side of the bed, the other gripping the edge of the world. Dr. Mehta returned quietly. "He's stabilizing," she said. "We're not out of the woods, but we're walking through them." No one spoke for a long time. Just the sound of Noah breathing, the most beautiful sound they'd ever heard. Outside, the rain had stopped. Axel stood as soon as he saw them through the glass dale, low, body tense, eyes never blinking. Ethan walked over, opened the door. Axel stepped forward and pressed his head gently into Ethan's side. This time, Ethan didn't flinch. He dropped to one knee and wrapped both arms around the dog's thick neck, resting his forehead there, where the fur was still damp from the storm. "We're still standing," he whispered. Axel licked the back of his hand once, then looked toward the doors again as if watching for the next shadow, the next threat. He was always watching. The morning came gray and slow, like the world itself had paused to exhale. Outside the hospital window, clouds hung heavy, with the sun not yet brave enough to shine. Inside, the only sounds were the rhythmic beeps of machines and the occasional soft shuffle of nurses moving like ghosts down the ICU corridor. Lena hadn't moved from Noah's bedside all night. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. But her hand never left his chest, rising and falling in fragile proof that he was still here. Ethan had taken the couch in the corner, legs folded awkwardly, his sweatshirt draped over his face at some point in the dead hours between 4 and 6 a.m. When the door creaked open, both of them looked up at once. Dr. Mehta stepped in. No clipboard, no chart in hand, just her, and something softer in her eyes. She pulled the chair up closer to the bed and sat, folding her hands slowly in her lap before speaking. "We got the latest spinal MRIs and the full lab results back," she said, voice steady. "It confirms what we were hoping for." Lena's throat tightened. "You mean it's transverse myelitis?" the doctor said gently. "An autoimmune response. Scary, yes, but not permanent paralysis. Not in his case." Ethan's shoulders sagged in slow disbelief. "His spine? Still intact. The inflammation is pressing on nerve pathways, which is why the limbs have weakened. But it's not degenerative. With treatment, steroids, rest, and pediatric therapy, has a very real chance to recover movement. Maybe fully, maybe not. But this isn't the end. It's something we can fight." For a second, neither parent spoke. Then Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, his hand curling over Lena's without looking. Lena blinked hard. Her lips parted, but no words made it out. Only a sob, raw and low, the kind that comes not just from fear but from the lifting of it. They stepped into the hallway together, the world beyond their child's room too bright, too loud. Ethan didn't realize they'd walked until they found themselves near the end of the corridor, beside a vending machine humming quietly. Neither of them reached for anything. They just stood there, still, shell-shocked. Then Lena turned toward him, eyes wet and trembling. "I thought we were going to lose him," she whispered. "I did too. But we didn't." "No," he said, voice thick. "We didn't." That's when it came. Lena pressed her face into his chest, arms curled tight around his waist, and her whole body broke into sobs. Relief wasn't always clean. Sometimes it hurt. Sometimes it wrung you out, made you weep, like the fear had only just caught up to you now that the danger had passed. Ethan held her, eyes closed, forehead resting against her hair. He didn't try to quiet her, didn't say, "It's okay," or "We're fine now." Because they weren't fine. Not yet. They were just not drowning anymore. And that was enough. A nurse passed and paused gently beside them. "He's stable," she said softly, a hand brushing Lena's shoulder. "Take your time. You've both earned a break." Lena nodded, sniffling, but didn't pull away from Ethan. When the nurse disappeared around the corner, Ethan finally spoke. "I keep thinking about the night before the fever," he said. "How I almost ignored that whimper. How I hesitated." "And you didn't," Lena said, pulling back just enough to look at him. "You moved the second I called. Still, I wonder if he'd have been okay if we caught it earlier. If I hadn't been so afraid of getting attached." Lena didn't answer at first. She took a deep breath and stared down the hallway, as if gathering something unsaid from its quiet distance. "Parenthood isn't about being fearless, Ethan," she said. "It's about showing up. Even when you're scared, even when you think you'll break. You think we're doing that? I think we've been doing that since the moment we brought him home." Ethan exhaled through a shaky smile. "He's a fighter." "He is," Lena said. "But he's not fighting alone." Later, they returned to the room and found Noah sleeping more peacefully than he had in days. His cheeks had color again. His breathing was steady. The fever had broken like a wave that finally receded. Outside the glass wall, Axel remained in his position head on pause, body alert but unmoving. The nurses had stopped questioning the dog's presence. They simply adjusted around him like he belonged. Because he did. He'd been the first to know. The first to sense the shift, to warn them. Lena opened the door and knelt beside the dog, her fingers threading through the thick fur along his ruff. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving." Axel's ears twitched. His gaze shifted to the crib inside. He didn't need to answer. He never had. That night, Ethan sat beside Noah's crib with a notepad in hand. For weeks, it had stayed empty. Too much had lived in his head: guilt, doubt, avoidance. Now, he scribbled 3 words across the top in block letters: Noah's recovery plan. Underneath, he began bulleting questions for Dr. Mehta, therapy schedules, immune boosters, routine check-ins, home care options. Lena walked in mid-thought, a cup of coffee in hand and the softest trace of hope on her face. "You planning his comeback already?" "Someone's got to get ahead of it," Ethan said, trying to smile. "Besides, he's got his mother's stubbornness." Lena chuckled. "And your ability to overthink everything?" Ethan stood, setting the pad aside. Then he stepped close, brushing a hand gently against her jaw. "You saved him," he said. We did. And for the first time in weeks, they kissed quietly, like a promise, exchanged not with words, but with breath. The house smelled like chamomile and warmed laundry. It was the scent of healing. Lena thought soft, clean, and deliberately ordinary. After 2 weeks, in sterile hallways and whispered consultations, the sound of a microwave humming and the click of a washing machine offered something better than comfort: control. Noah had come home. His tiny legs still trembled when he tried to move them, but they moved. That alone was enough to draw tears from Ethan the first time it happened, just the flutter of a foot beneath a blanket. Now, it was all about rebuilding. Not just Noah. All of them. Ethan stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by foam puzzle mats in bright primary colors. His shirt was streaked with formula, and his jaw carried the fine shade of stubble that always came when he was too focused to shave. He dropped the last square of matting with a grunt and stepped back to look at his work. A soft, safe zone. No sharp corners, no cold tile, just color and cushion. Lena peeked her head in, cradling Noah, who was drowsy but curious. "It looks like a preschool exploded in here," she teased. Ethan gave a tired smile. "Good. Means we're doing it right." "Is?" Noah squirmed in her arms, letting out a delighted squeal as his eyes caught the dangling soft mirror toy Ethan had just hung from the activity arch. "See that?" Lena whispered, almost reverently. "That's new. He wasn't reacting like that last week." Ethan's eyes softened. Progress. Tiny, shining miracles, stitched together in a patchwork of hard days. They established a rhythm. Morning stretches, guided by a pediatric therapist over video call. Slow, careful leg exercises that Lena guided with her voice and fingertips, whispering encouragement as if words could travel through muscle and bone. Midday play. Bright, tactile toys with crinkly textures and jingling sounds, meant to coax Noah's senses into remembering how to connect. Evening walk short, bundled strolls around the yard or down the quiet street. Noah in the carrier strapped to Ethan's chest, his little hand occasionally brushing against the edge of his father's collarbone. There was laughter again. Quiet, but real. And there was Axel. He had grown quieter, too, but in a different way. Since Noah returned from the hospital, Axel hadn't left the boy's side. He no longer waited outside the room like a sentinel. Now he slept on the rug beside the crib, head resting on his paws, ears twitching in tune with the baby's breathing. Every time Ethan entered the nursery, he expected the dog to stir. But Axel remained where he was watchful, almost reverent. Ethan paused by the door one night and whispered to the dog, "You keeping guard?" Axel didn't look at him, but he didn't need to. One evening, Lena found Ethan in the nursery alone, adjusting the baby monitor. He looked up, startled. "I thought you were asleep," he said. "I was. Then I realized you weren't." She stepped inside, barefoot on the cool hardwood, her arms crossing over her chest. "You okay?" Ethan glanced at Axel, then at Noah, who slept soundly. "I keep wondering when this will stop feeling like a borrowed moment," he murmured. "Like any second, someone's going to knock on that door and say we were never supposed to have this." Lena didn't speak. She sat down beside him on the floor. "You think I'm crazy," he said. "No," she said, brushing a hand through her hair. "I think you've seen the kind of loss that makes joy feel temporary." He looked at her, eyes rimmed with quiet grief. "I almost didn't want to build the mats or hang the toys. Part of me thought, what if he loses it all again?" Lena leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "That's the risk, isn't it? Loving someone this much. But we don't get to hide from that. Not anymore." Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Axel started responding to Ethan's voice. Not fully, not like he did with Lena or Noah, but there was a flicker in ear turning, a slight glance, a weight in the eyes that said, "I hear you, even if I don't trust you yet." Ethan noticed it during one of the morning routines. He knelt by the crib, whispering soft praises as Noah kicked his feet and caught Axel's gaze across the room. For a heartbeat, the dog didn't look away. He simply watched. And Ethan, without meaning to, smiled. Good boy. No reaction, but no retreat either. A beginning. They continued to rebuild. Noah began babbling again, long strings of vowel sounds that made Lena laugh from the kitchen. He gripped toys tighter, kicked stronger, held Ethan's finger with more certainty every day. And every night, as the sun slipped behind the pines and the house sank into hush, Axel would rise from his spot by the door and walk to the crib. He didn't circle, didn't pace. He simply lay down beside it. Like something in him knew the boy needed more than sleep. He needed presence. That Friday, Ethan stood at the threshold of the nursery and watched the quiet tableau, his son sleeping peacefully, and the dog keeping vigil below. He thought of how fragile things had felt just weeks ago, how easily they could have broken, and how, somehow, they didn't. He stepped forward and crouched beside Axel. This time, he didn't speak. He just rested his hand gently on the dog's back. Axel didn't move, but he didn't pull away, and for now, that was enough. The nursery was still bathed in the hush that only arrived after midnight. Noah's soft breathing rose and fell, steady like a metronome, as moonlight painted pale lines across the edge of his crib. Beside him, Axel lay curled at his usual post, his chest rising slowly, ears alert even in slumber. Lena stood at the doorway, unmoving. She held a mug of tea that had long since gone cold, fingers wrapped around it like it still held warmth. But it wasn't the tea she needed. Not really. It was something older, something buried. It started with a smell. Sterile gauze, antiseptic wipes, the faint tang of blood mingled with sweat and lavender soap. That delivery room. That night, it came back to her like a wave now. The girl had been so small, too young to be carrying that much pain, too scared to hold anyone's hand. But Lena had offered hers anyway, even when it wasn't accepted. She said she didn't want anything. Lena murmured aloud, barely above a whisper. Axel's ears twitched slightly, but he didn't lift his head. Noah stirred, just once, and then settled again. She didn't even ask to see him, just turned away, like she had already said goodbye before he even opened his eyes. Lena stepped closer to the crib and set the mug down on the floor, careful not to wake anyone. She crouched, gaze locked on her son. Except tonight, he looked a little like someone else. It had been snowing that night. Lena remembered rushing into the ER with her hair wet and boots squeaking on the tile. The girl's name hadn't been on any charts, just Jane Doe, shivering and silent, clutching her belly like it was already slipping away from her. She had grit in her jaw but fear in her eyes, the kind of fear Lena recognized, the kind that doesn't come from pain, it comes from secrets. Lena had stayed through the whole labor, had whispered breath counts, fetched water, wiped her brow. Even when the girl refused to speak, Lena had stayed. And when the baby came silent at first, then with a desperate cry that cut through the room like wind through broken glass, it was Lena who caught him. Lena who cleaned him. Lena who cradled him before the nurse even arrived. Now, watching him sleep years later, those same tiny fingers curled into his cheek. Lena's throat tightened. "I should have asked more," she said softly. "I should have pushed." The doctors had called it routine. Another runaway, no ID. Refused to sign anything but left with a faint scar on her wrist and a story no one wanted to hear. But Lena had seen her. The way she flinched at the sound of a phone ringing. The way she kept looking at the window, as if afraid someone was coming for her. "She wasn't just running," Lena whispered. Her voice cracked. She was hiding. A tear rolled down Lena's cheek, landing quietly on the rug. Noah stirred again in his sleep, and for a moment she thought he might wake, but instead, he turned his face toward Axel's fur and sighed, a tiny, contented breath. That's when the guilt really hit her. All these months' nights spent pacing the floor, mornings dreading bad news, days wondering why things felt off. She'd been focused on the here and now. Survival mode, one foot in front of the other. But she hadn't gone back, hadn't tried to find records, hadn't followed the thread of that girl's haunted silence. "Maybe I didn't want to know," she confessed, more to herself than anyone else. Because knowing meant questions. Questions led to truths, and truths could mean losing him. Her fingers brushed the edge of Noah's blanket, adjusting it gently over his small frame. His skin was warm, peaceful, innocent. But under that peace, was there something she'd missed? Something that girl had wanted them to see? Or hide? Lena sat down on the floor, back resting against the crib. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even Axel didn't stir no way, only watched her, one golden eye flickering open just long enough to say, "I'm listening." She wiped her cheek. "I thought love would be enough," she murmured. "That if we just held on tighter, we'd make him safe." But what if we don't even know what we're protecting him from? There was no answer, just the creak of old wood, the faint hum of the baby monitor. She hugged her knees to her chest, curling into the hush like it could shelter her from the doubt creeping in. She thought of Ethan, how tired he looked lately, how he watched Axel more than he watched Noah, how some nights his hand lingered on the doorframe before leaving the room, like he wasn't sure whether he was walking into safety or waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe he felt it, too, that something wasn't quite right. Maybe they both had felt it that night in the hospital when the fever wouldn't break and Noah's eyes rolled back. The doctor said, inflammation, a fluke. But sometimes, when Lena closed her eyes, she didn't see fever. She saw warning. Lena reached out again, letting her fingers rest gently on Axel's thick fur. He didn't move, but she felt the tension in him, the barely contained alertness beneath the calm. I think you know something, she whispered. She wasn't sure if she meant Axel or the memory of that nameless girl still lodged in the corners of her mind. She stared at the shadowed ceiling, voice barely audible. If something comes, you'll protect him, won't you? Axel's ear twitched once, and that was enough. The night had a thickness to it, the kind that clung to the windows and pressed its weight against the walls of the house, not with wind or rain, but with stillness, a hush, too deep, too deliberate. Lena's car had pulled away almost an hour ago, her taillight swallowed by the dark curve of the street. She had kissed Noah's forehead and pressed her lips to Ethan's temple before whispering, "You'll be okay tonight?" He'd nodded. But that had been a lie. The living room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of the baby monitor screen and the pale flicker of a muted documentary playing on the television, some slow narration about coral reefs Ethan wasn't really watching. He sat slouched on the couch, one leg tucked beneath him, Noah's favorite elephant plush in his lap, like he'd meant to bring it upstairs but never made it past the cushion. His hand gripped a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. Axel lay near the front door, as always, head resting between his outstretched paws, ears half-cocked, still, watching, waiting. The kind of stillness only a former working dog could maintain. There were moments Ethan swore the dog could hear the air shift. Upstairs, Noah was asleep. The monitor showed the tiny body curled on his side, one hand resting loosely on the bars of the crib like he was reaching for a dream. His chest rose and fell in gentle rhythm, his breathing faint but steady through the monitor's tiny speaker. That sound, the rise and fall, had become a heartbeat in the house. Ethan stared at it now, the soft green wave flickering on the screen. He tried not to remember the night it had spiked with static, tried not to think of the ambulance, the four, the look in Lena's eyes when she'd whispered, "Don't let go." He blinked, trying to ground himself. But something felt off tonight. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way the shadows reached a little further down the hall than they usually did. Maybe it was the exhaustion finally catching up to him. The bone-deep kind. That didn't just settle into your muscles, but into your soul. He hadn't slept well in days. Even when he closed his eyes, something inside him stayed awake tight and coiled, like a tripwire strung across his chest. He didn't know if it was fatherhood or fear. Maybe both. Axel shifted at the door, rising slightly, ears pricking forward. A low exhale left his nose. Not quite a growl, but not casual, either. Ethan glanced at him. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't respond, just stared into the hallway with that stillness again. Ethan waited. Nothing. No creak, no knock, just the groan of the house settling. He leaned back, trying to laugh at himself. "You're freaking me out, you know that?" Still, Axel didn't move. His tail thumped once, slow, then silence again. Ethan turned up the monitor's volume just a little, until the soft white noise of Noah's room filled the space like static mist. He checked the locks. Front door, back door, windows latched, alarm set. All fine. But the unease didn't lift. Eventually, the couch claimed him. Not sleep, at least not real sleep, but that drifting state where the world gets blurry around the edges, where thoughts dissolve into half-dreams and memories you didn't mean to remember. He saw the ocean again. Not the real one, but the one from the dreams, the one where he'd always been running towards something with no name, no face. Just the feeling that if he didn't get there in time, something would vanish. He heard Noah crying somewhere in the distance, but he couldn't move. A click, too soft to register consciously at first. But Axel heard it. The dog rose slowly to his feet, muscles tense, nose pointed toward the base of the stairs. Click! This time Ethan stirred. "Lena?" he mumbled, eyes half open. The coffee mug tilted dangerously on the edge of the couch. No answer. Axel's stance shifted into full alert tail low, body forward. Another sound. A floorboard. Upstairs. Ethan shut up. Heart suddenly awake. The monitor was still glowing. Noah still sleeping. He stared at the screen, but something felt off. He turned toward the stairs and froze. That was when the baby monitor crackled. Just once. Like static caught in its throat. Axel's body tensed, a low rumble gathering in his chest, deep and quiet. Ethan's hands curled into fists. He didn't know what was wrong, but something was. He crossed the living room in 3 strides, monitor in hand, nearly tripping over the rug. Axel moved beside him without command shoulder to knee, eyes fixed on the stairs as if he was reading the silence like Braille. Ethan reached the first step, paused, listened. The house held its breath. Then another faint creak. Not from the hallway. Not from the door. From inside the nursery. Ethan felt his pulse rise into his throat. He didn't call out Noah's name. Something primal inside him told him not to. The monitor screen still showed Noah in bed, but the frame was tilted slightly now, as if someone had bumped it. Ethan's fingers curled tighter around the railing. Axel's snarl deepened, low and barely audible, vibrating through the soles of Ethan's feet. He climbed the first step, then another. Then the sound came again, not a floorboard this time. A sigh, like someone exhaling. Not a child, not his son. Ethan froze mid-step, the weight of the monitor in his hand suddenly immense. And from behind him, the front door latch clicked again. But this time, it was unlocking. Axel spun in place, teeth bared, body between Ethan and the door in a single blur of motion. Ethan's mind caught up too slow. Axel, what the... Then a knock. 3 soft raps. Precise. Like someone who knew this door. Knew this house. The baby monitor fizzed again, and then the screen went black. The nursery was hushed, the kind of silence that didn't comfort but waited. A faint nightlight cast amber shadows across the walls, stretching the shape of stuffed animals into sleepy giants. The mobile above the crib turned slowly from the ceiling fan's breath, casting quiet, circular halos of animals that had long since stopped, spinning with joy. Noah slept, but uneasily. A twitch. A grunt. One tiny fist flung upward, then settling with a soft thud against the crib rail. The room exhaled. Then he moved again. This time, it was different. Noah's legs kicked. One knee caught the blanket and peeled it back. His small body shifted sideways, curling toward the edge. Still asleep, still dreaming. But now, the curve of his head edged too close to the slat's closer, inch by inch, until gravity took its silent hold. His shoulder rolled. His upper body slumped downward, and suddenly his head slipped between the bars. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but it was terrifying. He hung there caught, limbs sprawled, neck bent slightly forward. The room didn't stir, but the monitor did. Downstairs, in the suffocating dark of the living room, the baby monitor thought dead flickered back to life for a single breath. A static crackle, a hiss, then a faint, gurgled sound so soft it could have been mistaken for furniture shifting or the wind curling against the windows. But Axel heard it. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just snapped awake, muscles tight, nose up, ears forward. A tremor moved down his body like a charge resetting his bones. And then he bolted. The stairs blurred beneath his paws, his body silent as smoke, fluid like a current. He pushed the nursery door with his muzzle, no time for hesitation. Noah's crib was across the room, half bathed in warm light, half swallowed by shadow. Axel didn't need to see it. He sensed it. The energy was wrong. Noah was stuck. His legs were still in the crib, but his chest and head now leaned dangerously through the bars. His breath hitched, a strangled sound barely escaping from where his chin pressed against the wood rail. His cheek was turning red. His arms flailed gently, confused. He wasn't fully awake, and that made it worse. It meant he didn't know he was in danger, but Axel did. Without pause, Axel leapt. Not high, not hard, but just enough. He placed his front paws against the base of the crib and angled his head beneath Noah's dangling torso. With the gentlest nudge, he lifted the toddler's midsection with the curve of his back. It wasn't enough. Noah shifted, but his head tilted further down, caught awkwardly. A whimper. Axel froze. Then instinct. He moved to the side, planting one paw beneath the crib leg to steady his balance, and used his shoulder to wedge Noah's ribs up, pushing with precise weight just enough to create a tilt, a shift of gravity. Noah slid. Back inside. Axel nudged him once more with his nose, carefully turning the boy until his head rested flat against the mattress. Noah Kuhedens. A soft, breathy noise, then sighed. His fingers closed around the blanket near his mouth. Safe. Still sleeping. But safe. Axel didn't move for a long time. He stood beside the crib, eyes fixed on the tiny rise and fall of Noah's chest. His body didn't twitch. His ears didn't flick. He simply watched. Only when he was certain when the danger had passed like a cold wind did he lower himself to the rug. But this time, he didn't sleep by the door. He curled beneath the crib, spine pressed to the wood, and let his breath mirror the boy's. Downstairs, Ethan stirred on the couch, startled by a noise he couldn't name. He blinked, confused, glanced toward the dark stairs, checked the clock. 3:41 a.m. Nothing. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. Felt something cold run through him. A feeling he couldn't explain. He climbed the stairs quietly, phone flashlight in hand. The nursery door was half open. Inside, the room was still. Noah sleeping. Axel not at the door. Ethan stepped inward. Then he saw it. The dog, curled under the crib like a sentry carved from flesh and devotion. And he knew something had happened. He didn't ask what. He just knelt beside the crib and placed his hand on Axel's side. "Good boy," he whispered, voice cracking. Axel didn't move, but his tail thumped, once, against the floor. Soft, steady, like a heartbeat. Ethan didn't breathe at first. Not when he stepped into the room. Not when the beam of his phone's light fell on the crib. Not even when he realized Noah was alive. Safe's small chest rising and falling with that rhythm only babies had, as if life hadn't just skimmed past him in the dark. It was what he saw beneath the crib that unraveled him. Axel, not curled at the doorway, not pacing the hall like usual, but under the crib's massive frame tucked into the narrow space, ribs brushing the wooden slats, nose close enough to Noah's arm to feel the boy's warmth with every breath. And then Ethan noticed Noah's hand. So small, so trusting. It was nestled in Axel's fur, fingers clenched in a quiet grip just behind the dog's ear, as if he had found an anchor in sleep and refused to let go. Ethan's knees buckled before his heart could. He dropped to the floor beside them, breath coming in shallow waves that caught in his throat. He didn't even realize he was crying until he tasted salt. It wasn't the kind of weeping that made noise. There was no wailing, no sobbing, just a silent, shattering release grief and guilt spilling through the dam of disbelief. He had left Noah alone. He had fallen asleep, but Axel hadn't. Axel had stayed. Axel had saved his son. And now, he lay there still as a statue, eyes half open, as if ready to move again if the danger returned. Ethan reached forward hesitant, trembling. He had patted Axel before, touched his fur in passing, clipped on the leash with gentle caution, but he had never held him, not like this, not with everything on the line. His hand sank into the thick fur just behind Axel's shoulder, and he felt something, shift something in him. A wall, a hesitation, a wound too old to name. Gone. Axel turned slightly, just enough for his muzzle to brush against Ethan's wrist. He didn't flinch. Neither did Ethan. He moved his hand up to Axel's neck, pressed there firm, slow, grateful. A human gesture met by something wordless, ancient, and true. Axel exhaled a soft grunt, not a growl, just acknowledgement. The room warmed now, dim, still wrapped around them like a held breath, finally let go. Ethan looked up at his son again. Noah hadn't stirred. His mouth hung slightly open in sleep, lashes fluttering as if he dreamed something just beyond reach. But his fingers hadn't moved, still tangled in Axel's fur, still trusting that the creature beside him wouldn't leave. Ethan lowered his forehead to the crib's edge, resting there in the quiet. "I didn't deserve this," he whispered, voice cracking. "I don't know how to say thank you for this." Axel didn't move, but he didn't leave either. Memories flooded Ethan's mind like broken film reels stitched together. The way he had eyed Axel with suspicion in those early weeks. How he'd kept a distance, afraid the dog could feel the questions he couldn't admit out loud. Questions about fatherhood, about his own inadequacy, about whether he was too damaged to raise a child. And all this time, the one he feared might turn on him had guarded his family, protected what Ethan couldn't. Even when Ethan had stopped watching, even when Ethan had stopped believing in himself, he sat there for a long time just breathing, one hand resting on Axel's side, the other gripping the crib rail like it might keep his guilt from floating away too easily. Then Noah stirred. A faint, wordless coo. Not awake, not alarmed, just a twitch of movement. And Ethan watched as his tiny fingers flexed gently against Axel's fur. A sound caught in Ethan's throat again. That image he's son wrapped in sleep, tethered to this dog by nothing more than instinct and closeness, it would live in him forever. Like a scar, but made of light. The night stretched on, but it didn't feel cold anymore. Ethan didn't stand, didn't go back downstairs. He pulled the folded blanket from the nursery chair and settled beside the crib on the rug, half lying, one arm still stretched out across Axel's ribs. Axel didn't protest. Noah slept, and the silence returned, not empty this time, but full. A silence born of trust, of second chances, of something sacred neither man nor beast could put into words. Just before his eyes closed, Ethan whispered again, "Good boy." A pause, a soft thump of tail in reply. The front door creaked open just after dawn. Lena stepped inside quietly, shoulders slumped under the weight of 12 hours and too many heartbeats. She set her keys down without a sound, slipped off her shoes in the dim glow of early morning, and stood still for a breath. The house was too quiet. She didn't expect music or laughter. Not yet. But there was usually something, the rhythm of soft footsteps, the shifting whimper of Noah in his crib, the creak of a coffee pot, or Axel's occasional low huff by the door. But now, silence. And in that silence, a flicker of unease found her chest. She padded softly through the hallway, past the framed photo of the three of them at the parcone of the rare smiles caught by accident. Before the fear, before the hospital, her fingers brushed the edge of the frame as she passed, almost out of instinct. Then she reached Noah's door. It was slightly ajar. She nudged it open with 2 fingers and froze. The light was soft, barely morning, that gray-blue hue that lingers before the sun fully commits to rising. Inside, the scene didn't move, but it breathed. Ethan was curled on the nursery floor, still in the clothes she'd left him in the night before. One arm was stretched across Axel's broad back, his hand resting in fur. Axel lay pressed against the side of the crib, chest rising in calm rhythm, ears tilted backward but relaxed. One paw stretched beneath the wooden rail, as if still watching over. And there, in the crib, Noah slept peacefully, his tiny hands still tangled in Axel's thick coat, his cheek turned toward the dog as if drawn by gravity. Lena didn't speak. She couldn't. The image caught something in her, snagged it like a loose thread tugged without warning. For a moment, all she could do was stand there and feel the quiet after the storm, feel the trust in that room raw, earned, and fragile. Ethan stirred before she moved. He blinked blearily, as if unsure whether the world he woke into was the same one that had nearly torn apart the night before. Then he saw her in the doorway. Their eyes locked. No words passed. Not yet. Just the truth of it carried in the hush between them. The truth of exhaustion and terror, and the kind of relief that leaves your soul sore from the inside out. Ethan sat up slowly, not wanting to disturb either the child or the dog. His voice came out hoarse, barely more than a breath. He saved him. Lena's hand covered her mouth. The tears came instantly, soft, soundless. The kind you don't fight because there's no shame in crying when your child is safe. She crossed the room and dropped to her knees beside Ethan, eyes never leaving their son. Her hands found his, clutched tightly, grounding them both. Axel didn't move. He watched her with quiet awareness, but didn't flinch, didn't shift away. And that more than anything made her cry harder. Ethan kept his voice low. I don't know how he knew, but Noah was slipping through the crib slats. I'd fallen asleep. Heh, must have seen it happen through the monitor or I don't know. But he got there first. Lena looked down at Axel, her tears glinting in the morning light. The dog met her gaze and didn't look away. She reached out slow, gentle, and stroked his head. "You good, brave soul," she whispered. "You knew." Her touch lingered. Something passed between them. A quiet acknowledgement. No dramatics, no fanfare. Just truth, breathing in the quiet. The sun began to rise fully now, slipping through the blinds in soft strips of gold. It caught in Noah's hair, turned it into a crown of warm light. He shifted in his sleep, and for a moment, Lena held her breath. But he only sighed content, still latched to Axel's fur as if the connection was more than physical, as if something in his small body recognized this dog as protector, constant, family. She exhaled shakily. "I think," Ethan whispered, "he finally trusts me, because Axel does." Lena turned to him. "He's always trusted you. He just needed you to see it." Ethan let out something between a laugh and a sob. "You give me too much credit." "No," she said, "just enough." They stayed there a while longer just watching. Morning crept in. The shadows lifted. And in their place, warmth, stillness, a rare and fragile kind of peace. When Noah eventually stirred and opened his eyes, he didn't cry. He looked from one face to the other, then down to Axel and gurgled softly, fingers curling tighter into fur. A small sound, but to Ethan and Lena, it was music. It was life. It was a beginning. Later that morning, with Noah in her arms and Ethan brewing fresh coffee with hands that still trembled slightly, Lena looked at Axel curled in the doorway, no longer tense, no longer wary, and she whispered into the stillness of the kitchen, more to herself than anyone else. "We needed him more than we ever knew." From his spot by the door, Axel blinked slowly, then rested his head on his paws. At peace for now, and home. The waiting room smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and printer ink. A cartoonish mural of ocean animals stretched across one wall, though Noah paid no attention. He sat in Lena's lap, fingers curled in the hem of her sleeve, while Ethan rubbed his back in gentle circles. Dr. Harding had asked for a follow-up. After the fever scare, after the miracle. That wasn't a miracle, but maybe it was. They owed it to themselves to be thorough. Noah had improved: more eye contact, more vocalizations, small kicks of the leg that sent waves of cautious hope up Ethan's spine. And today, they weren't afraid to hope. But that wasn't why the room was so quiet. It was because they'd finally told someone. "Well," the doctor said softly, placing Noah's chart aside, "I have to say, if I hadn't read this myself, I would think you were describing a movie." Ethan smiled tiredly. "Felt like one." Lena shifted Noah higher on her hip. "We didn't want to dramatize anything. But it was real. Axel, he just knew something was wrong." The pediatrician leaned forward, hands folded over her notepad. "Instinct like that? It's rare. Especially in a dog still adjusting to a new environment. Are you sure he's not still working for the CIA?" They all chuckled, tension cracking just slightly. Then the nurse entered with paperwork, pausing when she saw them. Her eyes flicked to Noah, then to Ethan. "Is that the little boy?" she asked quietly. "The one? From the crib?" Lena blinked. "How did?" "I heard Dr. Harding mention something in the break room." The nurse hesitated, then smiled sheepishly. "Would you be okay if I shared the story? Just privately at first. I know a vet tech who volunteers with retired service dogs. They'd love to hear about Axel." Lena and Ethan exchanged a glance. There was something vulnerable about putting your story out into the world, like releasing a piece of your heart without knowing if it would be held gently or tossed aside. But this felt different. This wasn't about them. It was about a dog who had saved a child in the dark. Ethan nodded slowly. "If it helps people understand what these dogs go through and what they can do, I'd be honored." It started small. An anonymous post on a private group. "Retired police dog saves infant from crib fall." No names. Just the story. Just the heart of it. But hearts have a way of finding each other. By the next day, a screenshot landed on a local parenting forum. Then someone from the police K9 unit shared it with the caption, "This is why they never stop watching over us." Within 48 hours, it had a hashtag, Number Axel the Guardian. And then it spread like fire through dry grass. The first package arrived on a Thursday. A soft chew toy in the shape of a badge. No note. Just a tag that read, "For Axel. Thank you." By the weekend, the porch was full. Tins of dog biscuits, organic baby wipes, handwritten cards from strangers signed with hearts and paw prints. One envelope carried only a child's crayon drawing of a big black dog curled up next to a baby in a crib. Noah pointed to it with wide eyes. Ax. The word was soft, nearly missed, but it was there. Ethan caught his breath. Lena's hands flew to her mouth. Axel, hearing his name, stood from his usual post by the front door and ambled over. He sniffed the drawing, tail giving one quiet thump. It was the first time they saw Noah voluntarily reach out. Tiny fingers stretched toward Axel's ear, brushing fur, then resting there. And this time, he didn't pull away. The mailbox overflowed with notes from parents of disabled children, police officers, dog lovers, and people who simply needed to believe in something good again. One read, "I lost my son 2 years ago. Your story gave me peace I didn't know I still needed. Bless Axel. Bless you." Another, scribbled in shaky penmanship, "I never knew dogs could feel like that. Maybe there's hope for my boy, too." Lena read every single one. She cried through most of them. And every night, after Noah fell asleep with Axel by his crib, she'd sit beside Ethan in the living room and say, "I don't know why this matters so much to strangers." Ethan always answered the same way, "Because it matters to us." The local news called next. Then the regional paper. A producer from a family feature show left a voicemail asking for an interview, promising to keep it respectful, no intrusion, just a spotlight on a heroic dog and the family he healed. Ethan wasn't sure. They weren't looking for fame, but Lena said something that stuck. If it helps one parent not feel alone, or helps one dog find a second chance. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. He nodded. They said yes. That night, as cameras waited to schedule, and packages still showed up daily on their doorstep, Ethan knelt by Axel on the porch. The dog leaned into his side like he belonged there, and he did. "Did you know?" Ethan murmured, fingers curling into fur, "that saving one boy would mean saving so many others?" Axel didn't move, but his present Cecil and steady was answer enough. Inside, Lena watched through the window, Noah asleep on her chest. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Ethan stepped inside. He kissed her forehead, rested his palm over Noah's back. "Let them tell the story," he whispered. "It's not just ours anymore." Emsel. It was one of those evenings where the world outside melted into soft amber. Sunlight spilled through the nursery blinds in golden slats, dancing across the quiet rise and fall of Noah's chest. He was asleep in the corner of the playmat, nestled under a cotton blanket with a stitched giraffe in the corner. Axel lay nearby, head on paws, eyes closed but alert in that way only retired working dogs knew how to be. The room pulsed with quiet. Ethan sat cross-legged beside his son. A notebook rested open in his lap, the kind with brown craft paper and a worn leather spine. His thumb traced the crease down the center, a shallow hesitation carved in silence. Then he exhaled and began to speak, not loudly, not even for anyone but the boy half dreaming at his feet. "Hey, buddy." Noah didn't stir. "I'm not good at this part," Ethan continued, voice hushed, words weighed. "The talking stuff, feelings. It always seems safer to keep things quiet, to let the silence do the talking." He glanced toward the window, where the light caught the photo of Noah's first day home, Ethan holding him awkwardly, like a bomb he didn't know how to disarm. "But you're teaching me something different." He swallowed, pausing. Then, "You know what scared me most? Not the diapers or the crying or the medical stuff, not even losing sleep. It was you needing me, really needing me, and me not being enough." His throat tightened. "I spent so long thinking if I could protect something, if I could hold a gun, bark orders, fight fires, pull someone from danger, then I was doing my part, being a man, a soldier, a protector." Ethan shifted, reaching to gently brush a curl from Noah's temple. "But when you came along, none of that mattered. You didn't need a soldier. You needed someone to hold your tiny hand, someone who could rock you at 3 a.m., someone who knew how to speak without words." He let out a trembling breath, surprised at the weight loosening from his chest. "And I didn't think I was that guy." He looked down. But then he showed me, he said, tilting his chin toward Axel, that I didn't have to be everything. I just had to be here, present. Still, you taught him that. And now, maybe you're teaching me. Noah murmured in his sleep, a faint exhale and stretch of fingers. Lena stood in the doorway, unnoticed. She hadn't meant to listen. She'd gone to take a call, only to find herself rooted outside the nursery watching her husband unfold, one raw edge at a time. Ethan had changed, not in big, loud ways. He still checked the locks twice, still took Axel on early morning walks with the leash wrapped around his wrist like he was heading into a combat zone. But something had softened. His voice, his gaze, the way he lingered longer when kissing Noah's forehead goodnight. Now she saw the last wall coming down. Ethan glanced toward the door and froze. I didn't know you were... Lena smiled gently and crossed the room. It's okay. She knelt beside him, hand finding his. You're a good dad, Ethan. The kind Noah will never have to doubt. His eyes brimmed, and he laughed just once, low and cracked. That's the first time I believed it. That night, after the house settled into hush, Ethan didn't reach for the remote or his phone. Instead, he took the notebook to the kitchen table. The hum of the fridge and the soft snoring from the nursery filled the silence like a familiar song. He opened to the first page. The paper felt heavier now, more sacred. At the top, in careful, uncertain handwriting, he wrote, Letters to Noah. Then paused. Then wrote more. Dear son, I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to read these to you out loud, but maybe someday, when you're old enough or when I'm gone, you'll find them. And you'll know. Your dad was scared, so scared, of messing up, of not being what you needed. But I loved you anyway. From the second you were laid in my arms wrapped in blankets and questions. I loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it. Even when I was more shadow than man. But you brought the light. He stopped there, closed the book gently. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like he had to fight sleep. In the days that followed, journaling became a ritual. Not daily, he wasn't that structured, but often. Consistently. In coffee-splattered mornings, during naps, sometimes in the hush between two heartbeats, when Noah had just cried and then sighed back into peace. The letters weren't perfect. Sometimes they rambled. Sometimes they were a single sentence, like, you smiled today and I nearly fell apart, or you drooled into my sandwich and I still kissed your cheek. But they were honest. And honest was new. Lena once found one open on the table. She didn't read beyond the first few words, but those words stayed with her. I think you made me human again. One evening, Ethan walked into the nursery as dusk fell. Axel was curled beside the crib. Noah was asleep, his hand gripping Axel's ear like it was a lifeline. Ethan sat in the rocker. I'm not who I used to be, he whispered. And that's okay. His fingers rested on the spine of the notebook. I think this version of me is exactly who I needed to become. To be yours. M. The therapy room smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Morning sun streamed in, and in the quiet rhythmic creaks of the exercise table, Maya, the pediatric therapist, moved Noah's legs gently. Lena watched from a nearby chair, notebook in hand but forgotten. Ethan stood silently behind her. Axel, their retired canine shepherd, lay in the corner still, alert, eyes fixed on the boy like he always was. We're just going to do our stretches, sweetheart, Maya whispered. Noah didn't answer. He never did. Until he moved. A twitch, so subtle it might have been imagined. Then another. A slow curl of the toes. Maya froze. Ethan stepped closer, voice trembling. Noah, did you just? The next twitch wasn't a reflex. It was intent. Axel stood. One sharp bark, as if confirming what no one dared believe. Tears spilled freely. Ethan held his son's foot like something sacred. I knew you were still in there. Maya's voice cracked with awe. That came from him, embering. Axel padded forward, resting his head near Noah's foot. It twitched again, this time reaching toward the warmth. It was real, a beginning. Later, standing outside in the hospital garden, Ethan whispered to Axel, You knew before we did. Thank you for never leaving him. It began with a shuffle. Noah's elbows dragged his small body across the rug, legs trailing behind. but his eyes bright focus tracked Axel like a soldier following orders. Axel didn't bark. He simply lay a few feet away, tail thumping slowly. He was coaching, quietly. An inch. Then another. Lena stood frozen in the hallway, hand to her mouth. "He's crawling," she whispered. "Dragging, maybe?" Ethan murmured. "But yeah, he is." Axel nudged a blue ball a little further. Noah reached, missed, grunted, and pushed again. 10 agonizing minutes later, he grabbed it. He smiled. It was small, crooked. But his. "Attaboy," Ethan whispered, eyes wet. "Attaboy, Noah." Mornings turned into drills. Noah woke with a squeak. Before Ethan or Lena could reach him, Axel was already at the crib. Their language was silent. A nose nudge meant, "Ready?" A soft whimper, "Wait." On the living room mat, they played. Axel rolled balls just out of reach. Noah crawled. Then, by week 3, he pulled himself to his knees. By week 4, he crossed the whole room. Axel never left his side. That Saturday, Ethan built a ramp. It wasn't fancy, just pine wood and rails, painted blue like Noah's braces. Lena brought lemonade as Ethan tightened the final screw. "What is it?" He smiled. "A launch pad." Noah's first time on the ramp. He hesitated. Axel waited at the top, ball in his mouth, tail wagging. Noah crawled, grunted, climbed. When he reached the top, Axel dropped the ball into his hands. Noah giggled. It was the first time they'd heard him laugh like that. It echoed through the yard like sunlight. They called it K9 hide-and-seek. Axel would hide squeaky toys around the room, and Noah would crawl, guided by sound. Each time he found one, he beamed. Play disguised as therapy. Axel nudged. Ethan encouraged. Lena clapped. And Noah fought harder. Every night, Axel curled beside the crib, ears twitching with every breath Noah took. They weren't just dog and child. They were teammates. Then the letter came. Ordinary envelope. No return address. But the moment Lena opened it, something shifted. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just needed to know if he's safe. That someone kisses his forehead when he sleeps." Lena sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in her hands. 4 paragraphs. No name, just grief, quiet and raw. That night, Noah reached a milestone, pulling himself to stand against the couch. The living room exploded with joy. Lena kept the letter in her pocket. She didn't speak of it, not yet. But when the house slept, she wrote back, "He is more than safe. He is loved. He laughs when we blow raspberries on his belly. Axel never leaves his side. You ask if someone kisses his forehead when he sleeps every night. Twice, if I'm honest. He is home." She didn't send it. She placed it in a drawer beside old recipes and unused birthday candles. Some pain doesn't ask for answers. Only acknowledgement. Weeks passed. One morning, as Ethan adjusted Noah's braces, he felt tension in the little legs. Real strength. Noah grunted, pulled himself to a low crouch. Then, like it was, nothing, he rose. His first stand. Axel barked once. Noah giggled. Lena covered her mouth, eyes wide. Ethan dropped the wrench. Noah took a shaky step toward Axel, arms flailing. Knees wobbly and collapsed into the shepherd's side. Axel held steady. Noah squealed in triumph. Ethan scooped him up. "You did it," he choked. "You really did it." Lena was crying. Axel simply licked Noah's ear, and somewhere deep inside all 3 of them, something finally let go. Not just fear, but doubt. That night, Ethan wrote one more entry in the journal. "You walked today. Not far, not fast, but with purpose." And Axel barked like the world was beginning again. "I don't know how much you'll remember of this, but I'll remember enough for the both of us." He closed the journal, kissed its cover, then stepped into the nursery. Noah slept with one hand wrapped in Axel's fur. Outside, the wind rustled spring leaves. And inside, peace settled not in silence, but in breath, in presence, in the miracle that kept happening, one step at a time. The first real warmth of spring unfurled gently across the backyard sunlight. Golden grass, soft, breeze laced with honeysuckle, and smoke from a neighbor's grill. In the center of it all, Noah stood, or swayed. His little hands clutched the pushcart Ethan had built from scrap barnwood. His braces caught the light. Ethan knelt behind him, hands steady on Noah's hips. 2 steps, then 3, then a squeal of joy as Noah fell into the dandelions, arms flung like wings. Ethan laughed, scooping him up. 5 steps from the blanket. Lena clapped, eyes shining. You little miracle. Beside her lay Axel, the old German shepherd, his ears twitching. When Noah laughed, Axel rose. He always did. And when Lena blew bubbles into the breeze, Axel chased them like a pup leaping, kicking up dirt, tearing through the picnic, tail a blur. Noah shrieked with delight. It was the sound Ethan thought he'd never hear from his son. Later, Lena would call it a day frozen in Ambertha Day. Noah walked on grass. The day Axel almost caught the sun. The day grief cracked open and light poured through. They stayed out for hours, grilling, napping, telling stories. In the golden hour, Ethan took out the old camera he almost pawned one hard winter. Snap. Lena blowing bubbles. Snap. Axel mid-leap. Snap. Noah stumbling into Ethan's lap, face lit with triumph. That night, Ethan wrote in his Letters to Noah journal, "Today you walked. Not far, not fast, but with joy. That's everything." Outside, the wind carried laughter that refused to be forgotten. It happened again. 3 soft knocks. No urgency. Just memory. Ethan froze in the kitchen. Lena, in the living room, stilled mid-reach. Even Axel lifted his head. They knew. At the door stood the woman, her hair now neat, her eyes calmer, a man standing beside her with quiet support. "I didn't come to take him," she said. "I just needed to see he was okay." Lena stepped beside Ethan. Noah toddled into view behind them. When the woman saw him, saw her son, her eyes filled. "He's walking? With help?" Lena said. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered, "for not being ready." No one ever is," Ethan murmured. I needed to know he landed somewhere soft." "He did," Lena said. Her hand found Ethan's. "Would you let me say hello?" After a pause, Ethan nodded. 5 seconds, Lena offered gently. The woman knelt, eyes locked with Noah's no tears. Just awe. Noah, unprompted, held out his favorite blue block. She smiled, like he'd given her the world. "Thank you," she whispered. Axel stepped calmly between Themnod's threat. But Guardian, his silent message was clear. "You're allowed." But only because they said so. The man extended an envelope. "A letter, for when he's older. Only if you think the time is right." Lena took it. "We'll keep it safe." They left quietly. As the door clicked shut, Noah lifted the blue block again and giggled. And just like that, the weight lifted. A few weeks later, another knock, same scarf, but this time she stood alone. "I didn't want to come in," she said. "Just wanted to leave this. She handed Lena a thick envelope, sealed with a white daisy. "I'm moving out of state, starting over. But before I go, I needed to give you this. Legal papers. A second letter. Signed custody. No conditions. I've carried shame so long I forgot what light felt like," her note read. "You gave him what I couldn't. Joy, safety, a name spoken with love. You are his parents. Fully. Without my shadow." "Oh." Lena folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with spare keys and a birthday candle that never got used. Some things don't need to be read twice to be remembered. Outside, spring carried on. But something had shifted. Later that day, Noah crawled into Lena's lap. She kissed his head and whispered, "You are loved, you are safe, and your story is yours now. M." That night, she tucked the envelope into the fireproof box under their bed next to Noah's birth certificate and a photo of Axel in baby sunglasses. She wouldn't revisit it often. She wouldn't need to. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories close not with a bang, but with peace. The morning began with fog curling low across the backyard, softening the edges of the world like a half-remembered dream. Inside the house, all was still except for the ticking of the wall clock and the rhythmic hum of the dishwasher. Lena stood in the bathroom, barefoot, heart racing. The little stick lay on the counter beside the sink, its window slowly blooming. She didn't look at it at first. Instead, she stared at her own reflection, at the subtle flush across her cheeks, at the wild flutter in her chest. as if her body already knew what her mind was, still tiptoeing around. 3 minutes. She counted them in quiet, shallow breaths. When she finally turned back, the result was unmistakable. 2 pink lines. 2. Her knees bent before she even knew she was sitting, hands trembling, not from fear but from the weight of something beautiful and impossible and real. She pressed a palm to her abdomen, barely able to believe it. There was another heartbeat inside her, another story just beginning. Tears came, uninvited but welcome. They fell without drama, quiet and clean, like the kind that follow a prayer answered. She didn't tell Ethan right away. Instead, she tucked the test gently into a drawer, wrapped in a paper towel like something sacred. All day, she moved through the hours with a secret glowing under her skin. Every time Noah laughed, every time Axel nudged her side with that knowing gaze, she felt the presence of it again, that tiny miracle humming in the quiet. It wasn't until the end of the week that she finally let it out. She waited until the golden hour, that stretch of late afternoon where the sun pours through the windows like warm honey and the house feels suspended in a kind of hush. Ethan had just finished building a small bookshelf for Noah's room. He stood in the doorway, shirt smudged with sawdust, pride written in the relaxed set of his shoulders. "I have something for you," Lena said, trying not to let her voice crack. Ethan turned. "Yeah?" She handed him a small, brown gift bag, tied with a navy ribbon. He raised an eyebrow, smiling. "What's the occasion?" "Just open it." He pulled the ribbon loose and reached inside. What he drew out made him stop completely. A tiny cotton onesie, soft blue, with 3 simple words stitched across the chest. "Big Brother Noah." Ethan didn't speak. For a heartbeat, his world simply paused. He looked up at Harriet's widening, blinking once, then again as realization began to bloom. "Wait, are you?" Lena nodded, lip trembling now, despite herself. "Yes." He dropped to his knees as if gravity had changed. His hands were on her stomach before she could reach for him, his forehead resting just below her navel. "Another heartbeat," he whispered. "There's another heartbeat." Tears slipped from his lashes before she even saw his chest rise again. Noah, nearby on the floor, clapped his hands as if sensing the joy, giggling at nothing and everything. Axel barked once, tail wagging, as if to say, "I knew before you did." Ethan rose slowly, pulling Lena into him, pressing a kiss to her temple, then her cheek, then her lip soft and reverent. "When?" he asked. 7 weeks, she said. "I wanted to be sure before telling you." Ethan just shook his head in disbelief. His smile broke wide open now, lighting his entire face. "I didn't think I could feel this kind of happiness again," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me either." For a while, they simply stood like that, wrapped in a quiet that wasn't silence, but something deeper knowing. Later that evening, they placed the onesie beside Noah on the couch. He reached for it instinctively, then paused, touching the letters one by one. "Buh," he mumbled, then gave up, giggling again as Axel licked his hand. Lena watched them, her heart so full it ached. It wasn't just the promise of a new life. It was the knowing that this life would grow in a home already healed. A home where ghosts had become guests of the past, no longer haunting the doorways. A home where Ethan had opened up, where Noah had found his legs, where Axel had come out of retirement not to protect, but to belong. And now, another story waited just beneath her ribs. Another heartbeat. Another thread woven into this family that had been pieced together from brokenness and built back stronger. That night, before they turned off the lights, Ethan placed his head gently on her belly again, listening for something he couldn't yet hear. But in his mind, it was already music. The light in the hallway that morning came in slow, soft stripes, filtered through the blinds like silent music painted in gold. It was early, quiet, just the sound of birds fussing somewhere beyond the kitchen window and the faint hum of the coffee maker preparing its first breath of the day. Ethan stood at the end of the hallway, barefoot, holding his phone out with trembling fingers. His heart raced with a kind of anticipation that had no fear in it, only hope, and something close to reverence. Down the hallway, Noah stood. He was upright. Wearing his leg braces blue with little star stickers, Lena had let him place himself. His tiny hands gripped the wall rail Ethan had installed last fall, palm over palm like a mountain climber, summiting something only he could see. and beside him Axel. Not leading, not pulling, just walking. Right at Noah's side, step for step, gaze alert but calm. His movement was measured, careful, like he understood the gravity of this quiet parade. Noah lifted one foot, braced it, paused, then shifted his weight forward. The braces did their job, but it was his courage that carried him. Then the second step, another. The hallway had never seemed so long, nor so holy. Ethan pressed record. His voice, when it came, cracked through a well of emotion he didn't bother hiding. "Keep going, buddy," he whispered, voice shaky. "You got it, just like we practiced." Noah's head turned slightly. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to recognize the love behind the lens. He grinned wide, proud, a little crooked. Then he walked, step by painstaking step, toward the camera, toward his father, toward a life they once weren't sure he'd ever walk into. Axel's tail swayed gently, a soft metronome to Noah's pace. When the boy reached the end of the hallway, Ethan didn't speak. He dropped to his knees and pulled him into a hug so tight the phone slipped from his hand and landed face up on the floor, still recording. It caught everything: the quiet sob in Ethan's throat, the way Noah laughed in surprise, the deep chuff of Axel as he settled beside them, and the light. Always the light. By the time Lena came in, wiping sleep from her eyes, the sun had climbed higher. The whole hallway was bathed in it now, casting long morning shadows that looked almost like wings. "He walked," Ethan said, still on his knees. "He walked, Lena." Lena looked down at her, sun tucked into Ethan's chest, his little legs dangling over the braces, cheeks flushed with victory. Then at the phone, still recording on the floor. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her eyes filled. Her hands came to her mouth, and then she knelt, toe wrapping her arms around both of them, her forehead pressed gently to Noah's back. There were no fireworks, no audience, just the three of them and Axel. That was enough. More than enough. Oh, breakfast that morning felt different. It wasn't fancy, just scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit, but joy hung in the air like a scent that touched everything. Ethan set the phone on the counter, replaying the video while they ate. He watched it again and again, barely able to believe it was real. Noah sat in his booster seat, legs swinging slightly, one hand buried in Axel's fur beneath the table. Lena handed him a strawberry shaped like a heart. He held it up to Ethan, then shoved it into his mouth with an exaggerated, mmm. They all laughed. Outside, the garden soaked in sunlight. Wind chimes sang lazily from the porch. The scent of spring flowers drifted in through an open window. Axel, ever the quiet observer, lay at Noah's feet like a guardian exhaling peace. Ethan reached for Lena's hand across the table, squeezing gently. "You think we should send the video to Dr. Kerr?" he asked. Lena nodded. "And your mom?" "And the whole universe." They both laughed. The kind of laugh that comes when life has thrown enough storms that you finally stop taking sunshine for granted. Noah suddenly banged the table with both hands. They turned toward him, startled. He pointed toward the hallway, then to himself. And then he signed the word for again. Ethan swallowed. His eyes glistened again. "You want to walk again?" Noah nodded. Axel stood instantly, tail wagging. Ethan rose, rounded the table, and lifted Noah gently from his seat. As he clipped the braces back on, Noah whispered something almost inaudibly, a soft hum, a sound of determination. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about doing, because today, his legs had found their voice. And this morning, that voice had said one thing loud and clear: "I'm coming." 2 years later, the morning light had changed, warmer now, fuller, like it had settled into the bones of the house, into the soil of the yard, into the rhythms of a family no one had seen coming. The back door flew open with a familiar squeak, hinges protesting, but not enough to slow them down. Noah ran first, leg braces long gone, replaced by muscle memory and grit. He was taller now, still small for his age, but in motion, he looked like freedom itself. Behind him, a burst of laughter. High-pitched, wild, unfiltered. A little girl, not quite 2, with a mess of chestnut curls and feet that never seemed to touch the ground. She chased after him, a bundle of chaos in a yellow sundress. her tiny legs pumping with joy only toddlers know. "Wait for me." Noah stopped just long enough to look back and grin, then kept going. They darted across the grass, bare feet pounding over patches of clover and sun-warmed earth. And trailing behind them, steady, slower now, but unshakable, was Axel. His face was grayer. The dark mask of his muzzle had softened into silver. His gait had shifted more deliberate, a bit stiffer, but his eyes still burned with that sentinel fire. He didn't bark, didn't rush. He simply followed, because that's what he'd always done, what he'd always be. The guardian, the constant. Noah stopped near the garden, crouching beside a row of strawberry plants. The little girl caught up, panting, and flopped beside him. They whispered something only siblings could understand, then giggled as Axel plopped down beside them with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a sigh. From the kitchen window, Ethan watched it unfold, mug in hand, smile resting soft and full at the corners of his mouth. He didn't call out, didn't interrupt. He just stood there, watching the two lives he once never imagined would exist. The boy who had every reason to give up, and the girl who came into the world like a whisper of grace. Lena joined him moments later, still in her robe, hair messy from sleep. She leaned against the counter, bumping his hip. "Your son's teaching her how to pick the ripe ones again," she murmured, sipping from her own cup. "He's very serious about it." Ethan chuckled. "She listens to him more than she listens to me. She listens to Axel more than she listens to either of us." They both looked out again. Axel had shifted slightly, laying his head on Noah's leg, eyes closed but ears alert. The sun kissed the top of his back, warming the graying fur. Time had touched him gently, not spared him, but not stolen him either. "Not yet." Lena turned her gaze toward Ethan. "You remember that first day?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window, his eyes caught in a moment that lived between memory and miracle. "You mean the day everything fell apart?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I remember thinking we had no idea what we were doing," he said. "Because we didn't." "No," Ethan said. "But love did." They stood in silence for a moment, letting that truth settle. Outside, Noah stood and offered his hand to his sister. She reached up without hesitation, trusting he'd catch her wobble. They took off again, slower this time, Axel trotting after them like a shadow made of loyalty. Ethan exhaled, then set down his coffee and pulled open the drawer beside the sink. He pulled out something wrapped in brown paper and twine. Lena arched a brow. "What's that?" "I never showed you," he said. "It's the journal, the one I started back when I didn't think I'd ever be enough." He set it on the counter, unwrapped it gently. Inside, dozens of pages, slightly wrinkled, stained here and there with coffee or tears or time. The cover read, "Letters to Noah." Lena opened the first page and ran her finger over his handwriting. "I kept meaning to read these," she said. "You still can," Ethan replied. "But not all of them. Some are for him when he's older." She closed the journal softly, then leaned in and kissed his cheek. "I think you were more than enough," she whispered. "And so was he. And so was Axel." They both turned back toward the window. Noah and his sister were now building a fortress out of sticks and pillows stolen from the porch. She laughed every time it collapsed. He kept trying again. Axel lay beside them, tail thudding every time one of them got too quiet, as if to say, "Still here. Still watching." Ethan reached over and took Lena's hand. "We didn't plan to become a family," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But love, it knew better than we did." And outside, in the yard where scars had become stories and broken things had learned to grow again, 3 hearts beat in sync with the rhythm of a dog's steady breath. Sometimes, it's not the words that stay with us, it's the quiet moments, the soft sigh of a dog lying beside you after a long day, the way they wait by the door, no matter how long you've been gone. Stories like Noah and Axel's remind us that love doesn't always come in the form we expect, but it always finds a way. German Shepherds, in particular, seem to carry a kind of wisdom in their eyes, a loyalty that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. They don't just protect us, they see us. And in return, all they really want is to belong, to be part of the heartbeat of a home. If you've ever felt that quiet bond with your dog and want to deepen it, there's a resource I came across that really spoke to me. It's not a gimmick, just something gentle and thoughtful that might help you and your dog understand each other a little better. No pressure, just a nudge from someone who's been moved by stories like this. If it feels right, take a look. You might find something special. And give your pup a scratch behind the ears from me. They always know.